Chapter 170. What do you want to do now? Qin Huaiyong's cold eyes fell on Madame D. I don't want to do anything. I'm not well. Who knew they would spill medicine on me? General, I'm the one who got hurt. Madame D cried and showed him her bandaged hands. There were many burns on his hands, and there were also many bandages wrapped around his hands. His eyes fell on Madame D's face. There was a scar on her face and some ointment was applied. Disgust flashed in his eyes. Madame D was getting worse and worse. Let Yuru take care of you when you're sick. Don't bother about Wanru. Qin Huaiyong said coldly. General, I've raised her for so many years and I'm her elder. Shouldn't I take care of her when she's sick? Madame D wiped her tears and said. She couldn't accept that she didn't torture Qin Wanru this time. It would be a waste if she didn't use such a good opportunity. It was rare for her brother to support her. Madame D didn't want to let it go. You know what you've done. Seeing that Madame D was still so persistent, Qin Huaiyong was so angry that he rushed to her. With a flash of fierceness in his eyes, he strode over, grabbed Madame D, and pulled her out. He was so strong that Madame D almost fell down. Seeing that the situation was not good, Madame D grabbed the pillar beside her and said, General, what are you doing? I'm taking you back to Duke Yong's mansion. Our Qin's mansion is too small to support you. Qin Huaiyong pulled hard and Madame D loosened her grip on the pillar. She screamed and rushed to hug Qin Huaiyong's leg, refusing to let go. General, I'm not being careless. I'm just sick. I just want to see my daughters wrapped around my knees. Who would have thought that Qi Rongji would be so unruly? She actually joined in and made this room into such a mess. Seeing the fierce look in Qin Huaiyong's eyes, Madame D knew she was in trouble. She hurriedly pushed all the blame to Qi Rongji. She didn't expect that Duke Yong's mansion, which Qin Huaiyong was afraid of in the past, didn't seem to have such a strong influence on him. She could scare Qin Huaiyong, but she didn't want to leave Qin's mansion. Qin Huaiyong's gaze fell on Madame D's face coldly. He lowered his eyes and did not know what he meant. He tightly pursed his lips and did not say a word. General, I really didn't want to do anything. It's really an accident. But I'm hurt, so I'm angry. Seeing that Qin Huaiyong was gloomy and didn't say a word, Madame D was scared. She hugged Qin Huaiyong's legs and cried. Qin Huaiyong's face was still cold. He lifted his leg and kicked Madame D down. She fell heavily on the ground. When her elbow hit the ground, there was even a loud thud. But even so, Madame D couldn't care less about the pain on her elbow. She held Qin Huaiyong in her arms and begged, General, I won't do this again. I still want to see our daughter marry into a good family and see her enjoy wealth and splendor. Madame D had been married to Qin Huaiyong for so many years, but this was the first time she saw him so angry. At this time, she naturally did not dare to contradict him and lead him in the direction of pleasing him. You still want to see your daughter enjoy wealth? Qin Huaiyong picked Madame D up from the ground. He held her close. His eyes were cold. At this moment, Madame D was really panicking. She subconsciously pulled Qin Huaiyong's hand and tried hard to let go of his hand. The clothes around her neck were pulled up tightly and she felt suffocated. She found it difficult to breathe and her face turned red, but she could not say a word. At this moment, she seemed to see the murderous look in Qin Huaiyong's eyes. He tried hard to make a sound, but because the clothes around his neck were locked, he couldn't say a word. He could only struggle with great difficulty, like a dried fish that had jumped onto the shore, desperately jumping but unable to jump out no matter how hard he tried. Madame D's face turned red, her eyes widened, and cold sweat broke out on her forehead. She tried to support herself with her feet on the ground and held Qin Huaiyong's hand tightly with both hands. The scene in front of her blurred. The next moment, her neck loosened and her throat was immediately cleared. Madame D fell heavily on the ground. She covered her chest with her hands and coughed hard as if she was going to cough her lungs out. The air that rushed into her mouth made her feel as if she had come back to life again. Even though this feeling made her cough uncontrollably, her face was covered in tears and mucus. The ointment had been washed away, and thick brown liquid slid down her face like a brown tear. It was strange and embarrassing. Hire an etiquette instructor from the palace to teach Yuru. If she still acts like this, it's useless. Qin Huaiyong's cold voice was right beside her ear. This kind of cold feeling was not the voice of Qin Huaiyong in her memory. Madame D was really scared. She trembled and covered her chest with her hands and took 2 steps back to keep a distance from Qin Huaiyong. Do I remember I told you before? Qin Huaiyong looked down at Madame D. Memories of the past rushed to Madame D's mind. The flush on her face faded and turned pale. Both her hands were trembling. No, remember what you said. Qin Huaiyong snorted and glanced at Madame D. He turned and strode away. Qin Yuru was still guarding outside. She wanted to rush in when she heard the strange sound inside. But she was held back by the old maid beside her. When the door opened, she rushed over and saw Qin Huaiyong's cold face. She was so scared that she stopped in her tracks. Qin Huaiyong didn't look at Qin Yuru and went straight to the courtyard. Seeing him leave, Qin Yuru rushed into the room. She saw Madame D falling to the ground with panic in her eyes. She looked pale and embarrassed. She was looking at a spot in the air and was trembling. Mother, what's wrong with you? Qin Yuru rushed over and helped Madame D up. Madame D turned her dull eyes. After a while, she seemed to recognize Qin Yuru. She hugged Qin Yuru and immediately burst into tears. At this moment, she felt like she was revived. Mother, what's wrong with you? Are you okay? Qin Yuru panicked. She had never seen Madame D like this. For a moment, her eyes turned red and she was angry and hateful. At this time, Nanny Zhou also came in. The 2 of them worked together to help Madame D to the bed in the inner room and asked someone to change her clothes. When everything was done, Madame D came back to her senses. She half leaned on the bed and held Qin Yuru's hand, unwilling to let go. Mother, are you okay? Qin Yuru handed the wet towel in her hand to Nanny Zhou and carefully looked at Qin Yuru's face. I'm fine. Madame D looked down with a cold face and slowly released her hand from Qin Yuru's hand. Go back first. I have something to say to Nanny Zhou. Mother, I'm worried. I don't want to leave. Qin Yuru still sat on the bed and said, I'm fine now. I'll find you an etiquette instructor in the palace in a few days and let her teach you the rules in the capital city. Madame D said slowly. Mother. Qin Yuru was shocked. She didn't know why she mentioned this at this time. Nanny Zhou, let First Miss go back. Madame D closed her eyes and said weakly. The scene just now was like a replay in her mind, and some things that she had almost forgotten came to her mind. First Miss, you go back first. Madame is not in the mood to talk to you now. Let me talk to her. Nanny Zhou knew what Madame D meant and gently persuaded Qin Yuru. But Mother is like this now. Qin Yuru said worriedly. First Miss, I'm here. Don't worry. Nanny Zhou said again. Hearing her words, Qin Yuru saw that Madame D closed her eyes tightly and didn't want to talk to her. Qin Yuru stood up helplessly and bit her lip. She looked at Madame D and decided to leave. Yuru, don't make trouble these days. Don't provoke Shui Rulin or Qin Wanru. Madame D suddenly said. Mother. Qin Yuru didn't know what Madame D meant and called her in a low voice. Go. Madame D waved her hand and Qin Yuru had no choice but to step back. Her mother's words today were incoherent and she couldn't grasp the main point. She stood in the corridor and thought for a while but couldn't think of anything. She gritted her teeth and vented all her anger on Qin Wanru. As long as there was a chance, she would definitely make that bitch pay back 100 times, 1,000 times. Where is the heir? She suddenly thought of Di Yen and asked. The heir went out with First Mississippi, didn't he come back? Mei Yen said timidly. Seeing that it was her reply, Qin Yuru stretched out her hand and gave her a hard slap. She pointed at the little maid who was lying motionless in the courtyard and no one dared to pay attention to. She said, See? If there is a next time, this will be your ending. Qin Yuru's vicious voice was so cold that Mei Yen knelt down in fear. She trembled and kowtowed hard on the ground a few times. First Miss, I won't dare to do it again. I won't dare to do it again. Qin Yuru snorted coldly and ignored her. She stepped on her hand and turned to walk out of the courtyard. Mei Yen was in excruciating pain but she didn't dare to say a word. She just looked at the cracking sound coming from her finger. It was so painful that she almost wanted to scream, but she swallowed it forcefully. Nanny Zhou, have you found the seal? In the room, Madame D slowly opened her gloomy eyes and asked after Qin Yuru left. Madam, I didn't find it. What should we do? Nanny Zhou had searched for it several times but couldn't find it. Now that Madame D asked again, she could only say helplessly. Forget it if you can't find it. Just go and print another one and make it old. Madame D said coldly. Blood flashed in her eyes, just like when she was almost strangled to death by Qin Huaiyong and her eyes couldn't see clearly. Madam, what's the use of it? You didn't particularly want it in the past. Nanny Zhou lowered her voice and gasped. She really didn't understand what was the use of it. In the past, Madame didn't care so much about it. Otherwise, she wouldn't have thrown it away so casually. What was not important in the past is very important now. Madame D lowered her head and clenched her fists tightly. The feeling of dying seemed to be right in front of her. Chapter 171. The magnificent palace, the tall Dan Ke, not only shone with golden light, but also the noble atmosphere of the royal family. Many people came to the Empress Dowager's Palace of Benevolence and Peace today, but they were all scattered in the garden of the Empress Dowager's Palace of Benevolence and Peace. The Palace of Benevolence and Peace was the main palace of the Imperial Palace, second only to the Emperor and the Empress. Many young ladies of aristocratic families were dressed very beautifully. Each of them was shy and elegant. Although they said they were enjoying the scenery, they were very careful when they moved, as if they were being appreciated. But in fact, they were indeed being appreciated. Although it was not said clearly, the young ladies who entered the palace knew that this time, they were probably going to choose the prince's wives, concubines, and so on. Therefore they all blushed. Just now, some of them had seen Prince Yu and Prince Zhou. The two princes looked extraordinarily handsome. Thinking that as long as they could marry them, not only was there hope for glory and splendor, but also the possibility of becoming the noblest among the women in the future, it made them very excited. Thinking of this, they became more and more shy. Everyone was well aware of the purpose of today's visit, but they pretended to know nothing, afraid that the princes would look down on them. Grandmother, I don't like it. Chu Luchen casually raised his eyes, leaned back, and said weakly. There was a leopard cat with long snow-white fur on his knee. Its pair of blue cat eyes looked particularly attractive, and there seemed to be a slit in the middle, revealing a mysterious beauty. At this time, it was also lying lazily in his arms, and the whole cat body was nestled in his arms. There are so many young ladies of aristocratic families, and they are all the noblest in the capital. Why don't you like it? The Empress Dowager, who was over 60 years old, sat beside him, touched her grandson's forehead, and said with a kind smile. The two of them were in a tall building in the Palace of Benevolence and Peace. The balcony outside was hung with a curtain, which could not only block the wind, but also let the sun shine in. Moreover, it did not affect the line of sight, so it was an excellent place to observe. This building wasn't too high above the ground, so they could see clearly. Not only were the figures of those delicate young ladies from aristocratic families visible, but even their appearances could be seen clearly. Just now, the Empress Dowager had seen quite a few beautiful young ladies and was very satisfied with them. Imperial grandmother, with my body, who would want to marry me? Chu Luchen said with a bitter smile. A pair of handsome eyes, like the reflection of stars in the sky, with a harmless weakness. Just one look made the Empress Dowager's heart soften, and she wanted to give all the good things to him. This child had a hard life. What nonsense are you talking about? My grandson is a man of gold and jade. How can there be no one to marry? Not only will there be someone to marry, but he will also marry the best one. If anyone doesn't like you, I will have her punished. The Empress Dowager deliberately said with a stern face. Imperial grandmother, if she marries me, she will become a widow, so Dawn, she will emperor. Grandmother, if she marry and will make her, family, and family. Will be. Immental Dowager will. And will Dow. What kind of words are these? Who said that? My good grandson should live a long life. The Empress Dowager was really angry this time. She frowned and said coldly. Imperial grandmother, do you believe this? Chu Luchun tried hard to smile. He was as handsome as a young man who had walked out of a painting. He had a kind of gloomy weakness, but he always involuntarily aroused the affection of others. Especially his eyes, which were like the starry sky, pure without any impurities. Chun, don't think like this. Grandmother and your uncle will definitely cure you. We will never let this happen. Although it sounded weak, the Empress Dowager still tried to promise her grandson, and the sadness in her heart surged like a tide. The current emperor was her son, and the former emperor was also her son. Chu Luchun didn't say anything this time. He gently touched the white cat on his knee and said, Imperial grandmother, they didn't come for me, did they? He looked very calm, as if he was talking about someone else's business. His long, fan-like eyelashes fell down quietly. When he sat quietly, he was like a painting, an expressionless portrait. The Empress Dowager was very sad. Her eyes fell on those misses from aristocratic families outside. Just now, she found all of them pleasing to the eye, but now they all became unpleasant to the eye. She would not forget that Chu Luchun was a little interested in them and specially looked at a few of them. But since Chu Luiwei and Chu Liuzhou passed by, his expression became gloomy, and he no longer seemed to be in high spirits. When Chu Luiwei and Chu Liuzhou walked past, those dignified and elegant women all smiled like flowers. Many of them peeped at them through the handkerchiefs in their hands. Their eyes were fixed on them, and they couldn't wait to stop them. Some outstanding ones even deliberately made some accidents to attract the attention of Chu Luiwei and Chu Liuzhou. They were really rude. How could such a woman want to enter the royal family? None of them can do. I will choose a better one for you next time. Although the Empress Dowager's face was not very good, she was still gentle to Chu Luchun. Imperial grandmother, I don't want them. I want to raise another cat, just like this one. Chu Liuchun's hand caressed the cat in his hand and said softly. But there is only one cat. The Empress Dowager said softly. This cat was a tribute from a foreign country. At that time, there were 2 sent here. Because he liked them, they were all sent to Prince Chen's mansion. He didn't expect that he couldn't raise one, and only this one was left. It was very precious. Imperial grandmother. Chu Luchun raised his eyes and looked at the Empress Dowager. Okay, as you wish. Anything is fine. Seeing his eyes, the Empress Dowager immediately softened and wanted to ask if there was another cat over there. Imperial grandmother, I will go back first. When you came to me just now, I didn't take the medicine. Chu Luchun seemed to be a little embarrassed and said with a little shyness. This child, he is already so big, but he is still so naive. Since you don't like them, go back first. Next time, I will choose a better miss from an aristocratic family for you. The Empress Dowager said with distress. This time, she also felt that the girls outside were a little too frivolous. Originally, she wanted to choose a good one for Chu Luchun and ask someone to take good care of him. Unexpectedly, when they saw Prince Yu and Prince Zhou, they couldn't wait to stick to them. It was really annoying. Her good grandson was so good, how could she let these women look down on him? Yes, Imperial grandmother. Chu Luchun nodded and leaned back. Xiao Xuanzi understood and pushed him to the stairs. When they reached the stairs, Chu Luchun got off the wheelchair and walked down the stairs slowly. Xiao Xuanzi carried the wheelchair down and put it flat before he sat down. Then he let Xiao Xuanzi push him to leave through the side door. Chu Luchun walked very quietly, not being discovered by the misses in the Palace of Benevolence and Peace who were admiring flowers, or waiting to be admired. When he walked out of the side door of the Palace of Benevolence and Peace, he raised the corner of his eyes, and the gentleness and harmlessness in his eyes faded, revealing a trace of coldness. Where did she go to play? She went to the street. I asked her. It seems that second miss wants to buy a shop, but she doesn't have much money at the moment, so she wants to borrow some money from the bank by mortgaging the new shop. Xiao Xuanzi knew who he was asking about and answered hurriedly. Go and have a look. Chu Luchun touched the white cat in his hand and said lightly. Yes, I will take you to have a look. Xiao Xuanzi answered hurriedly. Qin Wanru didn't know that her whereabouts had been tracked by Chu Luchun. She was indeed outside at the shop that she had taken a fancy to before. Today was the day she had chosen. Madame D and Qin Yuru had been very quiet recently, so there was basically no trouble in the mansion. Not only the shop owner, young Master Su, but also when Shichi was in the shop. On Qin Wanru's side, Nanny Dong was also standing on the side with all the necessary things. The two sides had reached an agreement, and the next step was to be the guarantor. When Shichi was also very helpless about Qin Wanru's inexplicable trust. In fact, he didn't want to care about this kind of thing at all, but when he saw Qin Wanru's little face with a little expectation, he couldn't help but soften his heart. She was just a girl who had not grown up yet. Although she looked young, she seemed to be very smart. Even when Shichi's good friend, young Master Su, kept praising her in private. He said that second Miss Qin had a sharp eye and liked when Shichi at first sight. It was indeed the best to let him be the guarantor. When Shichi, who was born in the left Prime Minister's mansion, was famous for being young and promising in the capital city. However, it was said that he was indifferent, otherwise, with his talent and learning he would have become an official early. However, young Master Su didn't expect that a person like him would agree to be the guarantor for a girl he had just met. He was also very surprised. Although he didn't think that Qin Wanru would lie, when Shichi's behavior still greatly surprised him. Now that the shop had changed owners, he didn't plan to leave and just watch the fun. Anyway, his ornaments and embroidery ribbons hadn't been sold yet, so it was natural for him to sit here. Could it be that the gifted scholar and the beautiful lady had taken a fancy to him? But this was a little too small. The shopkeeper of the bank was invited over. After Qin Wanru signed her name, she pressed her fingerprint and then pushed the file in her hand to Shichi. Just now, they had read everything, and Qin Wanru also raised some questions she didn't understand. Perhaps because she had asked Shichi a lot of questions in her last life, it was very natural for her to raise questions now. When Shichi took it and his eyes fell on the file, there was a small fingerprint on it. It was so small that he couldn't help raising his eyes and smiling slightly. It was really interesting that such a young girl could imitate others to press her fingerprint. However, with this shop as the foundation, no one was worried that she would suddenly run away. Moreover, she was the daughter of Qin Huaiyong, the Ningyuan army general of Jiangzhou, who was newly in the capital city. However, he heard that there seemed to be some problems with this daughter's background. With this question in mind, he gently pressed his finger on the ink on the side, and then pressed his fingerprint on the paper. Then he signed his name. He raised his head and handed the file to the shopkeeper of the bank. Chapter 172. When Shichi glanced at Qin Wanru calmly and raised his eyebrows. Give it to this young master. Qin Wanru pointed at young Master Su sitting beside her and said, Young Master Su, please come with me. The shopkeeper stood up with a smile. Since the business was settled, he naturally had to leave. With the guarantee of Prime Minister Zhou, some procedures could be saved and there was no need to do more verification. Then I'll go over first. Young Master Su actually didn't want to leave. He seemed to be a little interested, but he had to go, so he could only say to Shichi. Shichi waved his hand and nodded. Thank you, young Master Wen. I'll use tea instead of wine to toast you. Qin Wanru stood up with a smile, poured herself a cup of tea and bowed deeply. She was young, and now she was imitating an adult's manner of serving tea, which made her look childishly cute. Her big eyes were bright and lively, and she was very likable. You're welcome. Shichi said, but he reached out to take the cup of tea and took a sip. Young Master Wen, do you have any brothers in your mansion? Qin Wanru sat down again and asked as if she was just chatting. Her long, fan-like eyelashes fluttered twice, and there was a light smile on her face. I have 2 brothers. Shichi answered gently. He didn't look down on Qin Wanru because of her small stature and didn't take her seriously. Is your brother the same age as third young Master Wen? Qin Wanru asked curiously with a bit of childishness. This was completely opposite to her calm appearance when she dealt with affairs just now. It seemed that she was a child at this time, smiling and not caring at all. Even for some private affairs of others, she was not very polite and even asked about some private affairs of others. A few years older. Shichi said vaguely, Are your brothers married? Qin Wanru asked more and more questions that suited her current appearance. My eldest brother is married, but my second brother hasn't. When Shichi felt that he shouldn't answer her, but when he saw her eyes that could almost speak, he couldn't help saying it. His eyes fell on her pink and tender face, and his eyes were soft. The girl in front of him seemed to overlap with the image of his little sister in his memory. At that time, his little sister also asked about this and that curiously. A trace of pain flashed in his eyes. His eyelids drooped slightly. If his sister was still here, would she be like this? So obedient and sensible. Why doesn't third young master when second brother get married? Don't people get married early in the capital city? Qin Wanru didn't seem to realize that her words were becoming more and more impolite. Second brother can't choose a good marriage. When Shichi didn't know how to answer. Why can't I choose? Is it because there are too many people who want to marry into your family? Or is it because he doesn't like the young ladies of other families? Qin Wanru's words were actually not in line with her current age. She had reached the age of 11, and some early girls could choose their husbands now. But because she was young, she had a big advantage. When others saw her now, they basically thought she was under the age of 10. For some mistakes, they just thought she was not sensible. Second brother has always been arrogant and doesn't like ordinary girls. When Shichi said casually and didn't want to continue this topic. Third young master, when, do you have a cousin who grew up with you? Qin Wanru tilted her head to look at him and suddenly changed the topic. Her question made when Shichi silent for a while. He did have a cousin who grew up with him, but she didn't grow up with him. She was raised in their mansion. She was his aunt's daughter, Gu Shishu. His uncle went to the capital city to be an official. His aunt was worried that her daughter would suffer at a young age, so she raised Gu Shishu in his eldest brother's mansion. Cousin Shu was raised in our mansion. When Shichi thought for a while and said casually, this cousin who was the same age as him looked gentle, but when Shichi didn't like her inexplicably. Third young master, when, is it popular in the capital city for a cousin to marry a cousin? Does your second brother fall in love with your cousin? That's why he hasn't married yet? Qin Wanru seemed to be curious about cousin Shu again, so she took the opportunity to bring up the topic. When Shichi didn't know how she came to this conclusion and looked at her speechlessly for a moment. I must have guessed it right? Qin Wanru patted the table gently and her watery eyes became more and more lively. You didn't guess it right? When Shichi didn't want to answer her, but when he saw her beaming with joy as if she had guessed it right, he couldn't help but pour cold water on her. How could I not guess it right? It must be right. Third young master, when, you're not your second brother. How can you know what he thinks? Maybe your second brother thinks so he delayed the marriage. Qin Wanru pursed her red lips and said disapprovingly. His words were so arbitrary that when Shichi was speechless. How did this child come up with such a magical conclusion? Second elder brother doesn't like cousin Shu at all. He once told me that a man doesn't need to get married so early and that marriage isn't urgent. He also gave me an example of a cousin getting married. He remembered that second elder brother said that even if they are childhood sweethearts, there is no need to be so urgent. When Shichi thought. Thinking of this, when Shichi's heart skipped a beat and he frowned. Third young master, when, you look so preoccupied. Could it be that you and your second brother have taken a fancy to the same cousin? Qin Wanru suddenly said in surprise. She opened her eyes widely and looked at Wen Shichi in astonishment. Second Miss Qin, you think too much. Wen Shichi said slowly after a while. No? That's impossible. That's what it says in the storybook. Qin Wanru murmured in confusion. Then, she tilted her head to look at Wen Shichi. Third young master, Wen, isn't it said that two brothers fell in love with a cousin, and then they had a dispute and fought with each other secretly? Then the cousins stirred up trouble, and one of them killed the other in the end? Wen Shichi really didn't know what to say at this time. Was Jiangzhou so lax in controlling the misses from aristocratic families? How could they let such a miss in boudoir read this casually written storybook for fun? Third young master, Wen, what's written in this book is true. When we were in Jiangzhou, such a thing happened. It seemed that a seemingly weak cousin was seducing the eldest cousin on one side and the second cousin on the other. She looked very innocent. Later, the eldest cousin pushed the second cousin into the river and drowned because of her. Qin Wanru took advantage of her young age to talk nonsense and make up stories casually. There are so many things in Jiangzhou. When Shichi felt that Qin Huaiyong was an extremely incompetent father. A good girl didn't read some books to understand things but read nonsense. In fact, even if she read this kind of storybook, he didn't think it was a big deal. But was it really good for her to say such things to a man so casually? Second, Miss Qin, since the matter of the bank has been settled, I have something to do, so I'll leave first. When Shichi stood up and said with a gentle smile, "What about your cousin? Didn't you tell me?" Qin Wanru also stood up with a grievance. The corner of Wen Shichi's eyes twitched. He felt that his self-restraint was so good that he would act as a guarantor for this little girl who talked nonsense. Go back and read some books. Don't think about these things. He blurted out with a gentle rebuke. Then what books should I read? Qin Wanru looked confused. When Shichi felt that he wanted to lose his temper, not to Qin Wanru, but to Qin Wanru's father, the Ningyuan army general of Jiangzhou. How could he neglect his daughter to such an extent? Such a lovely girl didn't even know what books to read. If you want to read books, I have a few that are more suitable for you. When Shichi said, and then he frowned. Previously, he wanted to stay away from this girl who looked too naive. Why did he suddenly want to give her a few books? Thank you, third young master Wen. Qin Wanru was overjoyed. Originally, she wanted to get close to Wen Shichi and remind him to be careful of his second brother and his cousin, Gu Shishu. She also saw that Wen Shichi didn't take her words seriously, so she needed to remind him from time to time. Wen Shichi was a very smart person. If it weren't for his second brother Wen Xian and cousin Gu Shishu in his last life, he wouldn't have fallen ill and died early. In her previous life, she had occasionally heard about this from Wen Shichi's manservant. Wen Shichi was pushed into the water by his second brother, Wen Xian, and almost lost his life. Later, it was found that someone had tampered with the medicinal herbs, which almost killed Wen Shichi. Although he was saved later, he was only hanging on to his last breath. The reason was that Wen Xian, who looked gentle and weak, had been in love with each other before. Later, she felt that Wen Shichi was more promising and good-looking, so she fell in love with Wen Shichi. However, she pretended that Wen Shichi had to like her, putting her in a dilemma and asking Wen Xian to marry someone else. In a rage, Wen Xian plotted against Wen Shichi. Although Wen Shichi was extremely intelligent and knowledgeable, he didn't expect that his second brother would plot against him, so he fell into the trap. When the servant said that, he also guessed that the matter of the medicinal materials being exchanged should also have something to do with second young master and cousin Mississippi. However, no matter how he explained it to Wen Shichi didn't allow him to investigate further. Looking at Wen Shichi's receding figure, Qin Wanru took a deep breath, and the innocence in her eyes slowly spread out, revealing a trace of seriousness. Chapter 173. She didn't know when Chu Luqian appeared beside her. He looked at her coldly with a faint smile on his handsome face, which made people feel cold. Qin Wanru's eyes fell on a very conspicuous thing in his hand. Her watery eyes met a pair of blue cat eyes. After being stunned for a moment, she found that it was a white cat with blue eyes. It looked very cute, soft and chubby, and very beautiful. It was an extremely beautiful cat. Qin Wanru was sure that she had never seen it before, but it was inexplicably familiar. It seemed that there was such a cat in her memory. Was this something in her previous life? But after thinking about it carefully, she couldn't find the trace of this cat. This cat is... Qin Wanru hesitated. Hold it for me. Chu Luqian snorted coldly and threw the cat to Qin Wanru's arms. Qin Wanru hurriedly reached out to take it. The cat was very soft and comfortable to hold. Qin Wanru's hand involuntarily touched it, but the cat stared at Qin Wanru with a pair of beautiful blue eyes as if it was facing a formidable enemy. It even stretched out its claws. Chu Luqian's hand heavily patted on the back of the cat. The cat howled and turned to Chu Luqian with a sad cry. It didn't bare its teeth and claws at Qin Wanru, but lazily softened and nestled in Qin Wanru's arms. It didn't look hostile anymore. Xiao Xuanzi looked at his master and then looked at Qin Wanru. Suddenly he smiled more brightly. After bowing to Qin Wanru enthusiastically, he specially said, "Second miss, This cat likes to be touched. It will be happy when touched. Was it like this? Chin Wanru felt quite suspicious. It seemed to be very fierce when she touched it just now. But it was quite cute now. After thinking about it, she couldn't help but reach out to touch its back again. The cat made a purr sound, which sounded very comfortable. Its eyes, which were staring at Chin Wanru just now, closed comfortably. Under the white fur, it looked very cute. Child, why are you here? Chin Wanru sat down with the cat in her arms. The cat was quite heavy. At first glance, she knew it was well raised. Chin Wanru, I didn't expect you to be so scheming at such a young age. Chu Luchan squinted at her with a face full of displeasure. Your Highness, what happened to me? Chin Wanru carefully touched the soft hair of the cat and said, she hadn't seen this man for a while. What was he thinking of this time? You like Wenshichi? Do you want me to be your matchmaker? Chu Liuchen's lips curved slightly, and there was a glimmer of light in his black eyes that Chin Wanru could not understand. Child, am I still so young? Chin Wanru raised her head helplessly, hoping that Chu Luchen could see clearly. She can be a child bride for now. She will be fine after she grows up. Chu Liuchen's eyes were shimmering. He looked Chin Wanru up and down in disgust and suddenly suggested, aren't only children from poor families willing to become child brides? Chin Wanru said helplessly. She didn't know what she had done to annoy this man, who seemed to find trouble with her everywhere. If your status is far lower than the man's, you can also be a child bride. Chu Luchen touched his chin and suddenly felt that this was really a feasible plan. I actually don't want to be a child bride at all. Chin Wanru cried bitterly in her heart. Chin Wanru, you know you owe me your life, right? Chu Luchen suddenly laughed. He was handsome and elegant, and the coldness in his eyes was gone. At this time he even looked her up and down playfully, which made Chin Wanru feel cold all over. She didn't know what this temperamental Prince Chen wanted to do. Your Highness, thank you for saving my life. Chin Wanru stood up helplessly and bowed to him. This Prince Chen was the person she couldn't understand the most. Other people seemed to have traces, but this one's mood and behavior had always been unconstrained, completely different from ordinary people's thinking. Seeing her become nervous, just like the cat just now, Chu Luchen felt very satisfied. He raised his eyebrows and said, what do you think? Don't want to be a child bride in Deputy Prime Minister's mansion? I don't want to. Chin Wanru refused without thinking. Although she would repay Wenshichi's kindness, she didn't plan to devote herself to him, or in other words, she didn't plan to get married. In her last life, although she married Wenshichi, they were just teachers and friends, but not husband and wife. Even when Wenshichi died, he repeatedly told her that she could remarry in the future and didn't need to stay with him anymore. You really don't want to? Chin Wanru, you have to think about it. If I promise you, it will basically be done, and I won't give my promise easily. Chu Luchen said slowly. Chin Wanru pursed her small cherry lips and shook her head without any hesitation. Your Highness, thank you for your kindness. You really don't want to go? Chu Luchen asked with a smile. Chin Wanru didn't know why he insisted on this, but she shook her head again. Then don't you want to be a child bride in Deputy Prime Minister's mansion? Then go to another mansion. Chu Luchen said helplessly. Chin Wanru had a sense of danger, so she hurriedly shook her head and refused. Your Highness, you must be joking. I don't want to be a child bride in any mansion. She didn't know why Chu Luchen was so interested in helping her solve her lifelong problem. In fact, it's good to be a child bride. You can buy shops when you want and slap people when you want. You don't need to worry about the madam in your mansion making trouble for you. You can also make your father respectful to you and not embarrass you for your sister. You can even protect your mother who has remarried. Chu Luchen said with a smile. Chin Wanru was shocked, and there was a little sweat on her forehead. She blinked her charming and innocent eyes, bit her lips and shook her head again. There was no such good thing in this world. Everything had a price, and she was very clear about the price. She couldn't afford it, and she was not willing to pay it. Your Highness, how do you know that I want to buy shops? Chin Wanru bit her lips and wanted to change the topic. I saw it when I walked here. But you really don't want to think about it? Chu Luchun suddenly felt that it was very feasible. Your Highness, I really don't want to think about it. Although Qin Wanru was annoyed, she still had to smile and say, think about it? Ha. Chu Luchun suddenly stood up, reached out to take the cat away from Qin Wanru's arms, and then turned to leave. Xiao Xuanzi followed him closely. Qin Wanru looked at her empty arms in astonishment, and then looked at Chu Liuchun's back, feeling that her brain was not enough to understand it. What did he come here for? Miss, I have seen Prince Chen before. Jingxin Monastery. Yujia wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. He went to Mingqiu Nun to see him? Qin Wanru sat down again. The cat was really comfortable when she held it, but now it was gone, so she was not used to it. It was the master of Jingxin Monastery who treated Prince Qin, and the master of Jingxin Monastery told me not to tell others. Since she had started, it was not difficult to say the next words. How is his illness? Qin Wanru asked. It was not difficult to guess that Chu Luchun asked the master of Jingxin Monastery to treat him. It seems that the illness brought from the womb is very difficult to cure. If it is not treated properly, it will hurt his life. But the master said something about protecting him, and I didn't understand it at that time. Yujia said. What protection? Qin Wanru didn't quite understand. I'm not very clear about this. It seems to be a person, but it also seems that there is medicine to protect him. Yujia thought for a while and said, she was standing outside the room of the master of Jingxin Monastery at that time, so she didn't hear much. Later the master of Jingxin Monastery closed the door, so she didn't hear anything else. Later the master of Jingxin Monastery told her not to say this, and also told her not to tell Mingqiu Nun, because this distinguished guest might ask Mingqiu Nun to treat him. She was afraid that Mingqiu Nun would refuse, so she had to find an opportunity to say it tactfully. But in the end, Mingqiu Nun didn't do anything. While they were talking, young Master Su, who had finished dealing with things, came back. Seeing that when Shichi was not here, he didn't want to stay any longer, so he said goodbye to Qin Wanru and left. This shop and everything in it now belonged to Qin Wanru. After looking up and down and putting forward some suggestions for improvement, Qin Wanru went back to General's mansion. Nanny Dong stayed and asked Qin Wanru to go back and tell Dong Xiu'er that she would live here these days and wouldn't go back to Qin's mansion. She asked Dong Xiu'er to stay here and not to worry. After Qin Wanru returned to her room, she asked Nanny Yu to summon Dong Xiu'er. Dong Xiu'er came quickly. Qin Wanru just sat down and took a sip of tea, and she came. She first bowed to Qin Wanru in a well-behaved manner, and then stood aside, looking respectful and polite. She came with Nanny Dong. Although she also lived in Qin Wanru's Jifang pavilion, she was not Qin Wanru's servant, and there was nothing for her to do. Every day, she would embroider lace and sew small accessories like toggle and loop buttons in the room. Her hands were very skillful and she was also kind. Gradually, the servant girls in the yard became familiar with her. Of course, among them, Qing Shui was the closest to her. As a principal servant girl, Qing Shui didn't have much to do, so she went to chat with Dong Xiu'er when she was free. Is your leg better? Qin Wanru looked at Dong Xiu'er's leg and asked gently. She hadn't seen her for several days. Now, when she came in, although she walked in a hurry, she didn't show any leg disease, so she should be almost recovered. Thank you, Second Mississippi. If it weren't for you, my leg wouldn't have recovered. I will repay you even if I have to work like an ox or a horse in the future. Hearing Qin Wanru's question, Dong Xiu'er raised her head and said gratefully, You're welcome. Since your mother is helping me with everything in the shop, it's my duty to help you. Qin Wanru smiled slightly. Her eyes fell on Dong Xiu'er's delicate face, and then turned to her black hair. It could be seen that Dong Xiu'er was living a good life, and she even wore a beaded hairpin on her head. My shop has been taken over. These days, your mother is very busy and will live in the shop outside. She won't come back to stay at night. Your mother asked me to tell you this. Second Miss, my mother told me before she left. Second Miss, I want to ask you something, but I don't know if I should ask you. Dong Xiu'er hesitated and peeked at Qin Wanru's face. Second Miss, mother told me before she left. Chapter 174. Xiu'er thinks that Qing Shui is very dexterous with her hands. Can I ask her to make some ornaments like toggle and loop buttons and embroidery? Mother said that after the new shop opens, there will be a lack of such things. I'm afraid that I can't do it alone. Xiao'er said. Is Qin Shui's craftsmanship good? Qin Wanru asked with a smile. Qin Shui's craftsmanship is really good, and her needlework is also very good. If she can do it with Xiao'er, it will be even better. Dong Xiao'er thought that Qin Wanru had agreed, so she was overjoyed and said. Nanny Yu looked at Dong Xiao'er unhappily and coughed in a low voice. She turned to Qin Wanru and said seriously, Miss, Dong Xiao'er is your principal servant girl. It's not like we don't have enough food in our mansion. We need your principal servant girl to work to support the family. How will others think of you and our mansion? The identity of a personal principal servant girl of a miss from an aristocratic family was similar to that of a miss from a rich family. If her family was not in decline, she would not go out to work to support the family. Her words made Dong Xiao'er's face turn red. She lowered her head and said, Second miss, it's all my fault. If you are still in the mansion, let Qin Shui help you first. Qin Wanru comforted her with a smile. After all, Nanny Dong and Dong Xiao'er were not from the Qin's mansion. When the shop was almost finished, they would move out. On the one hand, they could come and go freely. On the other hand, it was convenient to manage the shop. Yes, second miss. Dong Xiao'er said obediently and then left. Miss, what does Qin Shui want to do? Qin Yu frowned and said after watching Dong Xiao'er's back disappear. She had an intuition that it was about Dong Xiao'er. She must feel that she can't stay here anymore. Qin Wanru said slowly. She saw clearly the hairpin on Dong Xiao'er's head just now. It was not an ordinary thing. Nanny Dong was so poor at that time that it was impossible for her to have such a thing. Even now, it was impossible for Nanny Dong to have it. This was the most fashionable style in the capital city, not an old thing brought from Jiangzhou. Up to now, he had only given Nanny Dong some daily necessities. It was impossible for him to have so much extra money to buy such a fashionable hairpin for Dong Xiao'er. So, the hairpin could only be from Qin Shui. After Qin Shui arrived in the capital, she hadn't gone out of the mansion even once. Unexpectedly, she had such a hairpin in her hand. It seemed that she and Madame D were secretly in touch. She picked up the cup of tea beside her and took a sip. Nanny Yu, send Qin Shui to ask grandmother when the etiquette instructor will arrive. Let Qin Shui ask. Nanny Yu said uneasily. Only then did she realize that something was wrong with Qin Shui. How could she still ask her to do something at this time? Yes, let her go. Qin Wanru lowered her eyes and said slowly. A maid gave away the hairpin just to make friends with Dong Xiao'er, or to leave me. It seems that this maid is anxious, then give her a chance. Let's see what she wants to do in such a hurry. It was Qin Huaiyong and Madame Dowager who decided to hire an etiquette instructor. Originally, it was only for Qin Yuru. But considering that Qin Wanru was sensible, she was still young and not very familiar with the etiquette and rules in the capital city. It was better to let someone teach her, so they hired 2 etiquette instructors. Because the main purpose was to hire an etiquette instructor for Qin Yuru, Madame D also took the initiative to ask Di Yen to tell his mother to ask Duke Yong's mansion for help. It was said that they hired 2 famous nannies in the capital city. They used to teach etiquette in the palace and were released later when they were old. Today was the day that the 2 nannies would come, but there was no news until now. Qin Shui went to Madame Dowager's Xining Pavilion and found Nanny Duan. Nanny Duan told her that the 2 nannies who had been hired could not come. It was said that they had been invited away by other families. Now another 2 nannies had been replaced. They were rushing to the mansion and would ask Qin Wanru to come when they arrived. After asking the questions, Qin Shui went to report to Qin Wanru. Replaced nannies? Qin Wanru asked in surprise. Didn't they say that they had been hired before? Why were they invited away now? Nanny Duan said that the other nanny had been hired a long time ago. When Countess Yong said that she had not officially decided on the matter. She said that she had to go to our mansion to show Madame Dowager, Madame, and young ladies to confirm it. Qin Shui had asked clearly just now, so she answered cleverly. She had just gotten the job, so of course she had to ask carefully. In other words, Countess Yong had said it casually and did not take it seriously at all? How about the new nanny? Qin Wanru thought for a moment and asked. I heard that the new nanny is also excellent, even better than the previous two. She was just released from the palace. The rules and etiquette of the palace are very in line with the current rules. If it was not because she was implicated by something, she would not be released at this time, Qin Shui replied. The nanny who taught etiquette in the palace was released at this time? Qin Wanru's heart skipped a beat. She suddenly thought of a person, and a trace of deepness flashed in her eyes. If it was really that person, then she must keep her this time. But if it was really her, she believed that Qin Yuru would not want her. Of course, this person was specially sent to her, but this was exactly what she wanted. She hoped that it was the person she was thinking of. It did not take long for Nanny Duan to invite her over. When Qin Wanru invited her into the room, she found that Qin Yuru had not come yet. Madame Dowager was sitting in the main seat, and there were two women in their 30s sitting on both sides. Neither of them looked like old nannies with wrinkles. In particular, the one on the left was a beauty in her 30s. She had a very beautiful face, but there was no smile on her face, and she looked a little stern. At this time, she did not talk to Madame Dowager, but just sat on one side with a cold face. She seemed to be very unhappy, which was actually very unlikable. The other one looked a little older and was also good at talking. They talked happily with Madame Dowager, and they looked kind. Madame Dowager's face was full of smiles, and it was obvious that Madame Dowager liked them very much. Qin Wanru came in and bowed to Madame Dowager according to the rules. Then she stood aside and curiously looked at the two young nannies. Zhuozhua, this is Nanny Zheng and Nanny Huang. Come and greet them. Madame Dowager smiled and waved to her. Qin Wanru bowed to the two nannies in a natural manner. A servant girl outside the curtain reported that Qin Yuru had come. Qin Wanru stepped to the side, and the little servant girl lifted the curtain. Qin Yuru walked in with Mei Shui. She was dressed in light green clothes, and she was tall and beautiful. She was completely different from Qin Wanru, who was still a little bun. She was in the prime of her life, and she was beautiful and looked extraordinary. As a famous beauty in Jiangzhou, Qin Yuru was naturally outstanding. Wherever she stood, she made people feel that she was extraordinary. The smiling nanny seemed to have a deeper smile. After looking at Qin Yuru, she could not help but look at Qin Wanru. Originally, she thought that the sisters from a small place could not do anything, but she did not expect them to be so outstanding. Although the older one looked beautiful, the younger one was even more exquisite, but she was still a little too young. After Qin Yuru came forward and bowed to Madame Dowager, she looked at the two nannies and had already made up her mind. She took 2 steps forward, took Madame Dowager's hand, and shook it with a kiss. Grandma, I want this nanny. She was referring to the smiling and amiable-looking nanny. Why choose Nanny Huang? This matter was facilitated by Duke Yong's mansion, and the purpose was for Qin Yuru. Naturally, Qin Yuru could choose by herself. However, Madame Dowager was still a little surprised that Qin Yuru chose the smiling Nanny Huang, so she asked, Grandma, I heard that Nanny Huang has taught me very well in the past. Although she is a little strict, she is very useful. Yuru has just arrived in the capital city, and she is not very clear about many rules. Previously, because of her ignorance, she made a fool of herself. Therefore, I will choose a stricter teacher for myself. Qin Yuru's words were particularly pleasant to hear, and there was a slight smile on her face. It seemed that she was not only a very good person, but also a person with self-awareness. She should be a young lady who knew the rules very well. Nanny Huang was also very satisfied and secretly nodded in her heart. In fact, she originally liked the second miss of Qin's mansion. Although this child was young, she would definitely be a stunning beauty when she grew up, and it was easier to teach her when she was young. However, this first miss was also so well-behaved and sensible, so it was good to teach her. Grandma. Qin Wanru reached out and pulled Madame Dowager's sleeve. She raised her head and looked at Madame Dowager eagerly, and then looked at Nanny Huang. Second sister, don't embarrass Grandma. If you act coquettishly, Grandma will be speechless. But this Nanny Huang is specially chosen by Aunt for me. Second sister, don't fight for her anymore, Qin Yuru said with a smile. Her words seemed to be a joke, but if Qin Wanru said it to Madame Dowager again, it would mean that she was fighting for the person she liked. The reason why she said it was chosen by Countess Yong for her was that she didn't believe Grandma would have the nerve to give the person to Qin Wanru. Moreover, this person was indeed chosen by Countess Yong in a roundabout way for her. This Nanny Huang was famous in the teaching circle in the capital city. She could not only teach well, but also use her previous relationships to enter the circle of noble ladies in the capital city. How could Qin Yuru give such a good thing to Qin Wanru? As for the other nanny, Qin Yuru felt bad luck from the bottom of her heart. A palace concubine who lost favor and was sent out of the palace, how could she know the rules? Even if she knew the rules, she had to avoid arousing suspicion. It was always bad luck for a person who came out of the palace with a crime. If one day the nobles in the palace remembered her, even the person she taught would feel that she was not pleasing and might even vent their anger on her. Of course, this nanny Zheng was specially given to Qin Wanru to thank her. Chapter 175. Yes, Grandma. Qin Wanru said softly. She stepped forward obediently, put her hands on the side of Nanny Zheng, and bowed sideways. There was no sign of displeasure on her face because of Qin Yuru's words just now. Nanny Huang's eyes fell on Qin Wanru involuntarily. She looked her up and down and showed a little surprise. Seeing Qin Wanru's bow, Nanny Zheng, who had been keeping a straight face, finally showed some emotion in her eyes. This bow was so standard that even Qin Yuru's bow just now could not compare with hers. It seemed that Nanny Zheng had learned the rules in the palace, and her body slightly squatted just right. A little higher would be too high, and a little lower would be too low. Second Miss Qin? Nanny Zheng finally spoke, and her voice was a little hoarse. Nanny Zheng, Qin Wanru said with a soft smile. Her watery eyes were also full of joy. It could be seen that she really liked Nanny Zheng, which made Nanny Zheng feel a little relieved. This child is not only good-looking but also knows the rules very well, or is very polite. I didn't expect that when Nanny Zheng was released from the palace and everyone tried to avoid her, there is such a miss who doesn't dislike me at all, which is really surprising. Nanny Zheng thought. If I teach Second Miss Qin anything wrong in the future, please forgive me, Second Miss Qin. Nanny Zheng's face was slightly moved, and her expression softened. There was even a trace of a smile on her lips. She thought that maybe it was a good thing to leave the palace. Seeing that Qin Yuru and Qin Wanru were satisfied, Madame Dowager breathed a sigh of relief and immediately asked them to return to the yard with their etiquette instructors. Back in the yard, Qin Wanru asked Nanny Yu to arrange accommodation for Nanny Zheng, and invited Nanny Zheng into the room. After entering the room and greeting Nanny Zheng again, Nanny Zheng's eyes fell on Qin Wanru, and she frowned. May I ask how old Miss is? 11 years old. Qin Wanru took the initiative to pour a cup of tea for her and said, Why do you look so young? Nanny Zheng did not expect that Qin Wanru was already 11 years old, and she looked a little surprised. Most 11-year-old girls were already slim and basically had the shape of a young girl, but Qin Wanru still looked like a little girl. You will grow up in the future, Qin Wanru said confidently. In her last life, she was not shorter than other women when she grew up. It was just that she grew up a little later, so she was a little short before. In the future? Second Miss, based on your age, you're not young anymore. After the new year, you'll be 12. This age is often the best age to look at girls in the capital. If Second Miss continues to look like this, it won't do, Nanny Zheng said bluntly. His words made Qin Wanru blush, and her delicate face turned red. Actually, this kind of words should not be said in front of her, right? Second Miss, you don't have to feel embarrassed. This is what girls have to do when they grow up. I have a few prescriptions here, which can be used to regulate the body and won't hurt the body. You can take some medicinal baths with you every day. Since Nanny Zheng had made up her mind, she naturally considered for Qin Wanru carefully. Qin Wanru's face was extremely beautiful. Even Nanny Zheng, who was used to seeing beauties in the palace, had to admire her. But even so, she was still too young. When people saw the second miss, few people were amazed by her beauty at first glance. Most people thought she was still young and just a little child. Nanny Zheng, you don't need to take medicinal baths. You can grow up naturally. Big sister's matter has not been settled yet. I don't need to worry. Qin Wanru raised her head. Although her face was red, she didn't look flustered at all, as if what she said was not the most shameful topic of an unmarried daughter. Such a bearing made Nanny Zheng involuntarily look at her a few more times. The feeling that the second miss in front of her gave her was completely different from that of a little girl like her. If she didn't see such a little girl in front of her, Nanny Zheng would almost think that the second miss in front of her was a miss cultivated by a big aristocratic family. This kind of calmness, this kind of words, and this kind of indifference to one's own appearance, how many women could do this? Nanny Zheng straightened her body, and her eyes became a little serious. For the first time, she treated the second miss in front of her as an adult. Second miss, you mean, I mean that you don't need to be outstanding. Just let nature take its course. You don't need to ask for anything too much. Otherwise, you will only be inferior. Qin Wanru smiled slightly and said meaningfully, Second miss, you don't want to marry a good man? Nanny Zheng asked in confusion. She didn't want to marry. This was actually Qin Wanru's real thought. In her last life, she died miserably, and her marriage was delayed again and again. Although she finally married Wen Shiqi, who was a good man and took good care of her, it was an ill-fated relationship after all. In the end, she became a widow and was even driven out of the gate of Wen's mansion. Considering all these reasons, Qin Wanru felt that it was better not to talk about this marriage. Of course, she would not say this at this time, because it would make people feel that she was too weird. Therefore, she euphemistically changed her words to let nature take its course. Just let nature take its course. Qin Wanru smiled, and her long eyelashes fluttered, covering all the emotions in her eyes. If she could, she felt that it was better to let nature take its course and not get married. If Shui Rulin gave birth to a child, it would be best if it was a boy. Then the child who inherited everything in General's mansion would be the future of General's mansion, and she could also rely on her younger brother and die alone. Nanny Zheng looked at Qin Wanru in front of her in surprise. Such a young child seemed to have experienced all the vicissitudes of life and seen all the ways of the world. Unexpectedly, she didn't care about the things that women from aristocratic families yearned for. Was she too young to understand, or she understood and didn't want to? Looking at the pair of beautiful smiling eyes in front of her, Nanny Zheng felt that this child should understand, but she didn't want to. Originally, because of the matter of leaving the palace, she felt that everything was boring, but suddenly she felt interested again. Nanny Zheng, are you willing to stay in Qin's mansion with me in the future? Qin Wanru suddenly smiled, and there seemed to be a burning fire beating in her eyes. I'm just an etiquette instructor. I will go back after teaching second miss for a while. Nanny Zheng didn't understand what Qin Wanru meant and replied. I'm still young. If I still want an etiquette instructor to teach me, it will take at least several years. Nanny Zheng just came out of the palace, and it is unlikely that she will return to the palace in the future. Don't you want a long-term residence? The smile on Qin Wanru's face was as warm as the spring breeze. These words reminded Nanny Zheng of something sad. Her face darkened again, and she remained silent. In fact, she did want to return to the palace. Qin's mansion was just a springboard in the transitional period. She believed that her master would also find a way. Nanny Zheng, I heard that you were released from the palace, and you were implicated because of some affairs. I don't care who Nanny Zheng used to serve, but I believe that no matter who it is, even if it is the Empress, it is not easy to get a person who has been released from the palace. If they could really keep her, they would not have released her at the beginning. Nanny Zheng was indeed the person in her imagination, so Qin Wanru naturally would not let her go. At this time, looking at Nanny Zheng's face, she knew what she was still expecting, so she simply broke all her expectations and said straightforwardly without any hesitation. Second miss, how do you know about the affairs in the palace? Nanny Zheng's face became very ugly and gloomy. I come to your mansion only to be an etiquette instructor for Second Mississippi. As for other things, please be careful with your words, Second Miss Qin. Even if Second Miss is still young, some things can't be said. It seemed that something in her heart was broken, and Nanny Zheng was very unhappy. Nanny Zheng, do you think I'm right? Qin Wanru smiled slightly and leaned back, which made her look very out of etiquette, but she did it very well, which made people inexplicably feel that what she did was not impolite. What do you want, second miss? Nanny Zheng's heart seemed to be hit hard by something, which made her very uncomfortable. Or it could be said that some things were as transparent as glass, but she did not intend to break it. But now it was broken by Qin Wanru unceremoniously. I don't want to do anything. I just feel that there is one less person like you around, so I want you to stay. What do you think, Nanny Zheng? Seeing Nanny Zheng's angry face, Qin Wanru continued to say unhurriedly, as if she did not see the fierce look on Nanny Zheng's face. Second Miss Qin, you just said that you have no ambition, but now you have exposed yourself. Nanny Zheng sneered, and her delicate face flushed with anger. She suddenly stood up. Letting nature take its course means letting others bully me? Or, in Nanny Zheng's understanding, letting nature take its course means giving up everything, letting others bully me at will, and even can't protect the people I care about most? Qin Wanru said with a slight smile. Her smile was very light, so light that it was almost impossible to see the smile at the corner of her lips. At this moment, although she was smiling, it made people feel cold. It was a deep and serene coldness that made people feel an inexplicable sense of creepiness. Nanny Zheng was shocked and looked at Qin Wanru in front of her in astonishment. She had imagined that the second miss of the Qin family had thousands of forms, but she had never seen the one in front of her. That kind of sarcasm even contained some bloodiness that she had experienced all year round in the palace. It was impossible for such a young lady in boudoir to experience elegance and blood. But this little girl who had not yet grown up in front of her strangely appeared in front of her, which shocked Nanny Zheng from the bottom of her soul. This kind of treacherous thing could not be expressed in words, but it reminded Nanny Zheng of herself unconsciously. Didn't she give up everything and be driven out of the palace? Didn't she let others bully her at will? Now she was avoided as a plague. If Qin's mansion had not just moved to the capital city and was unfamiliar with the people and the place, Nanny Zheng believed that they would not use her. Was he at the end of his rope? All the waiting she insisted on was actually just a bubble that she weaved for herself. If it was poked, there would be nothing left. Chapter 176. But there was a kind of fatal attraction, which attracted Mammy Zheng and made her unable to say no. In fact, she was not reconciled to it. Nanny Zheng, if you stay, I promise you that if you want to leave in the future, I will set you free. Looking at the changing expression on Nanny Zheng's face, Qin Wanru's smile became deeper and deeper. She was afraid that she would not have a peaceful life in the future. She needed more powerful help to go on steadily. Although Nanny Yu was her wet nurse, she could not help her well because of her limited knowledge and various aspects. She was loyal, but she lacked ability. Nanny Zheng in front of her was the best candidate. In her last life, she had heard of such a person. She was very resourceful, but because she was released from the palace, she could not enter a big aristocratic family to be an etiquette instructor. Finally, she entered the mansion of an official's family who had just arrived in the capital city. That was an unknown miss before, but she was raised to be a lady with etiquette and soon entered the circle of noble ladies in the capital city. It was said that the miss, who was not an outstanding miss, not only had an excellent reputation, but also became the ultimate power figure in the mansion when she married the second daughter-in-law of a famous aristocratic family. It really amazed everyone. The most important thing was that she had the help from the palace. And the so-called help from the palace should refer to Nanny Zheng, who became her etiquette instructor at that time and finally married with her. A palace servant who was punished to leave the palace unexpectedly had such a powerful means. This originally made Qin Wanru admire her. Now that this person came, she would let her stay. Second miss, do you dare to accept me? If you come, I dare to accept you. Second miss, I promise you. Such a small child made her feel that she was too scheming. Nanny Zheng thought that she should be afraid, but she heard her voice without hesitation. After saying that, she stood up, knelt on the ground, and kowtowed to Qin Wanru several times. At this moment, she was no longer Qin Wanru's etiquette instructor, but a servant who served Qin Wanru. Nanny Jing, please get up. After accepting her bow, Qin Wanru stood up and reached out to help her. Yu Jie also hurriedly gave her a hand on the side. Second miss, this servant will sign the contract in a moment. The hesitation in her eyes disappeared, and Nanny Jing looked at Qin Wanru and said, since she was a servant, she naturally had to sign a contract to sell herself. Since she was released from the palace, she was a free person, but she had been serving others and had no other relatives. In fact, Nanny Jing did not know where she would go. Now that he had made up his mind to follow Qin Wanru, he had to prepare the contract of selling himself properly. Nanny Huang also heard the news, but she did not laugh at it. She just closed her eyes slightly and then opened them again. Looking at Qin Yuru, who was laughing so hard that she lost her composure, she said lightly, First miss, no matter what happened, you should not laugh like this. It is impolite. At most, you should just smile a little. Nanny Huang, I just can't control myself. Nanny Huang, since Nanny Zheng is willing to stay, why don't you also stay? The conditions here will not be worse than second sisters, and I can even give you better treatment. Qin Yuru said with a somewhat sarcastic smile. First miss, you must be joking. Nanny Huang's face slightly darkened. Although she could not figure out Nanny Zheng's behavior and felt it was indescribably strange, this could not be the reason why this first miss said such somewhat insulting words. Nanny Huang suddenly felt that she had misjudged this first Mississippi. In fact, this first miss was not very sensible. Nanny Huang, don't be angry. I really think this thing is very ridiculous. My second sister is not a person who can be fooled. She is sophisticated. Is this Nanny Jing really not deceived and became a servant in the mansion? She gave up being an etiquette instructor and chose to be a servant. I don't know what Nanny Jing wants. Qin Yuru joked. First miss, please be careful with your words. Nanny Huang felt that she really misjudged this first Mississippi. Although they were in the mansion now, was this elder sister who kept saying bad things about her younger sister really a first miss who was well-educated and well-mannered? All right, I only invited you to be an etiquette instructor, not to reprimand me. It's your first time in the mansion, so I'll ask someone to take you to have a rest. I'm going to see my mother. Qin Yuru said impatiently. There were no outsiders here. Although an etiquette instructor was not a servant, she was just like a servant in the mansion. Did she really intend to discipline her? First miss, it is better to learn a rule first. Nanny Huang said expressionlessly. She stood in front of Qin Yuru and did not intend to let her go. What? You dare to stop me? Qin Yuru was furious. She was not ready to be educated by others. If you want to learn, then I will go back. Nanny Huang took a step back and bowed to her respectfully. Then she straightened her back and turned to leave. Qin Yuru did not expect that this smiling Nanny Huang was so difficult to deal with. After being stunned for a moment, she reacted, and her face immediately became very ugly. This matter was decided by Qin Huaiyong and Madame Dowager, and there was no room for her to refuse. Mei Shui, who was standing beside her, knew her mind. She hurriedly reached out and pulled Nanny Huang to smooth things over. Nanny Huang, don't be anxious. It is not that Miss doesn't want to learn, nor does she disrespect you. But you see, she has just arrived, and we still have to arrange a place for you to live. There will be many days in the future, and we have to satisfy you. It seems that she can't learn today. Nanny Huang, you'd better go to see the place to live first. If there is anything you are not satisfied with, just tell me. I will ask someone to change it immediately. Qin Yuru pulled a long face, and her smile looked vague. Anyone could see that she was not very happy. At this moment, she felt that her aunt must have mistaken her for someone else. Why was Qin Wanru's etiquette instructor so docile and even sold herself to be her servant without saying anything? Her etiquette instructor looked easy to get along with, but in fact, she was an unpleasant and inflexible person when they got along with each other. If she had known this, she would have picked Nanny Jing just now. Looking at Qin Yuru's expression, Nanny Huang sighed secretly in her heart. It seemed that she would not be very successful in educating Qin Yuru this time. This first Miss Qin was obviously disobedient. But now she was a newcomer, so she could not be pushed too much. After thinking about it, she no longer stopped Qin Yuru, stood up, and left with Mei Shui to see the room prepared for herself. Seeing Nanny Huang leave, Qin Yuru snorted coldly, and then went out to Madame D's Yulon pavilion. Who is she? She really thinks that she is a master. Madame D's Yulon pavilion was very quiet. Since the day Qin Yuyong almost killed Madame D, it had been very quiet. Of course, the servants did not know that Madame D was almost killed. They just felt that the atmosphere in the courtyard was very bad recently, and no one dared to say much. Even the instructions were whispered, for fear of provoking Madame D. The little servant girl was beaten to death by Madame D. Although the blood on the ground was washed away, the blood in people's hearts was not so easy to wash away. It was clean. Many people in the mansion were new now, and they secretly said that Madame D was a cruel person. Some people also said that Madame D was jealous and vicious. What happened in the kitchen before was that she wanted to make Madame Shui lose the baby in her belly. Since she could not give birth herself, she would not allow others to give birth. Of course, these rumors were spread secretly, and they were brought out of the mansion unknowingly. When Qin Yuru entered the room, it was very quiet outside, but she heard some sounds inside. It seemed that Madame D was talking to someone, but she could not hear it clearly. She only vaguely mentioned her name. Qin Yuru listened carefully, but still did not hear it clearly, so she walked into the inner room. Chapter 177. Seeing that it was Qin Yuru who came in, Madame D and Nanny Zhou breathed a sigh of relief. "Mother, are these my newly made clothes?" Qin Yuru didn't care and looked at the dresses in Madame D's hands curiously. She could tell that they were newly made and the color was a little familiar. Looking at them carefully, she found that they were made of the material she had chosen before. Were these her clothes? Yes, they are. Madame D nodded. Then why didn't you send them to me, but to Mother? Qin Yuru said discontentedly. I asked Nanny Zhou to get them. They are not completely done yet. Madame D put down the clothes in her hands and said with her eyes flashing. Then why did you bring them here, Mother? Qin Yuru asked in confusion. Although the material of these clothes looks good, they are not very outstanding. I have a few good servant girls here who want to embroider some flowers for you to be more outstanding, Madame D said. Thank you, Mother. Qin Yuru was overjoyed. She didn't like making clothes at that time. If Madame D embroidered some outstanding flowers for her, she would be very happy. Mother, what did you choose for me? Let me see. Qin Yuru said and walked over. Madame D and Nanny Zhou looked at each other and coughed. I am choosing the patterns, but I haven't chosen them yet. I will show them to you when I am done. Didn't you say that there will be an etiquette instructor coming today? Why didn't she learn from her etiquette instructor in her own courtyard, but came to me? Hearing her words, Qin Yuru immediately remembered her purpose of coming. She sat on the chair beside and said sullenly, Mother, I don't like this Nanny Huang. She is so troublesome to manage. Qin Wanru chose a good one, and I heard that she is willing to sell herself as a slave to follow her. What? Madame D didn't understand and asked in a daze. She's the troublesome palace maid that my aunt mentioned. Now she has sold herself to our mansion. I don't know what she's thinking, but she actually likes Qin Wanru. The more Qin Yuru thought about it, the more upset she felt. She also wanted an etiquette instructor who was so obedient. Sold herself? Madame D and Nanny Zhou widened their eyes and gasped. They had never heard of such a thing for so many years. Etiquette instructors had been in a mansion for a longer period of time, and it was even possible for them to follow their husbands after they got married. However, they had never heard of anyone selling themselves, and the one who sold herself was a palace maid who had just been released from the palace. In fact, everyone would avoid a palace servant who was released for that reason. How could Qin Wanru dare to accept her? Yes, it means to sell oneself. I heard that grandmother has also put it on file. Qin Yuru pursed her lips and said, Isn't grandmother afraid that this person will implicate the whole mansion? Father is still waiting for his position. If someone talks about this, it will be really troublesome. Although she said it was troublesome, Qin Yuru looked more like she was watching a good show. Madam, Nanny Zhou was pleasantly surprised. Madame D waved her hand and motioned her to stop talking. She looked at Qin Yuru and said, "How is your nanny? I heard that she is very likable and well-educated. She used to teach her to enter the palace. She is a famous etiquette instructor in the capital city. You have to get along well with her, and you can't offend her." Listening to Qin Yuru's tone just now, Madame D was quite worried. "Mother, I will listen to you. Moreover, and also, said so." Qin Yuru lowered her head and pulled the handkerchief with her face turning red. Countess Yong hinted that if she learned the rules well, the two families could get engaged. Countess Yong finally gave her a definite answer. How could Qin Yuru not be happy? Therefore, she accepted the job of etiquette instructor without any resistance. Moreover, she followed Countess Yong's order and chose Nanny Huang, who was very helpful to her. That's good. In this case, you can't be petty. Your aunt prefers girls who are more docile and obedient. You can't let her hear any bad rumors about you. Seeing that Qin Yuru was not angry, Madame D breathed a sigh of relief. She was afraid that Qin Yuru would do something out of control again. "Yes, mother. Then I will go back first." Thinking of Countess Yong's words, Qin Yuru felt that she could still bear the discipline of Nanny Huang. She would bear it first. She could bear it for so many years in Jiangzhou. Now that her dream would come true, why couldn't she bear it? In order to marry into Duke Yong's mansion, she could bear anything. After thinking it through, Qin Yuru went back. Madam, was Nanny Zheng, who was invited by Countess Yong this time, driven out of the palace? After Qin Yuru left, Nanny Zhou smacked her lips and said, "That day, when the person sent by Countess Yong told Madame D something, she was beside Madame D and heard it clearly. Eldest sister-in-law did say so. A girl who was rejected by the palace dared to accept her. The old woman is really bold." Madame D sneered and said with a gloomy look, "You go to Duke Yong's mansion later and ask my eldest sister-in-law what crime Nanny Zheng has committed. Which noble in the palace did she offend?" She couldn't afford to offend any of the nobles in the palace, especially the nobles who could drive people out of the palace directly. When Qin Yuru said that the etiquette instructor entered the Qin's mansion, Madame D thought it was a good thing. Maybe she could find a way to deal with the bitch and the mean girl from this matter. Nanny Zhou also had such an idea. Originally, she didn't know how to deal with Madame Shui and Second Mississippi. With the new Nanny Zheng, she was born to have a handle on them. "Okay, I will ask Countess Yong about it later." Nanny Zhou nodded and agreed. Ask someone to embroider the clothes with a few patterns and let the first miss wear them when she might meet Duke Xing's mansion. If this is true, there will be some clues. Duke Xing's mansion will definitely find us, and we don't have to find them. After saying this, Madame D talked about what they had discussed in a low voice before and threw several dresses at her hand to Nanny Zhou. "Madam, in fact, I still have doubts." Nanny Zhou took the dresses and hesitated. "Whether it is true or not, we have to try. When I was in Jiangzhou, I thought I could ask a former servant of Duke Xing's mansion. But I didn't expect it was a useless one." Madame D snorted. In fact, it was just a guess that combined all kinds of things she had seen and thought. She didn't take it seriously at first. But now, he had no choice but to take it seriously. One of the most important reasons was Qin Huaiyong's attitude. The conjecture he had made at the beginning was just a casual remark. Even he didn't take it seriously, but he didn't expect Qin Huaiyong to take it seriously. Let's have a try. If it failed, it would have no impact on her family. If it succeeded, the benefits would be amazing. Her daughter would be powerful and she would also benefit. However, it was better to ask that servant girl to come here. If she could follow Yuru, there would be some clues. "Madam, I think it is too coincidental." How can there be such a coincidence? Nanny Zhou certainly knew what Madame D was thinking, but she still thought it was too whimsical. How could it be so coincidental? And she even linked up the cause and effect as if it was true. It doesn't matter whether it is a coincidence or not. Let's take it as a coincidence for now. Maybe it is true. Being asked by Nanny Zhou, Madame D was also very hesitant. But after thinking for a while, she immediately became firm. It was such a good opportunity. If it was true, it would be a great fortune, and Yuru's identity would be extremely noble in the future, Nanny Zhou also needed to report before leaving Qin's mansion. Now it was Shui Ruolin who was in charge, so she naturally needed to report to Shui Ruolin. Nanny Zhou was very careful and followed the rules. Then she went to Chuehua Gate. After saying something to the old maid guarding the Chuehua Gate, Nanny Zhou walked out. After a few steps, she suddenly saw a servant girl hiding in front of her. Nanny Zhou's eyes were very sharp, so she immediately found that it was not a servant girl of her mansion. She immediately stood still, turned around, and walked over. After the servant girl hid in the bushes, when Nanny Zhou walked over, she saw that the servant girl was squatting there with her body curled up. It was obvious that she was hiding from her. Although the clothes on her body seemed to belong to her mansion, the pattern was not. Which mansion do you belong to? Why did you sneak into the mansion? Nanny Zhou had always helped Madame D to manage the mansion, so she was not weak. Seeing that there was something wrong with the servant girl, she immediately shouted, "I'm looking for someone." The servant girl did not expect that Nanny Zhou's eyes were so sharp. When she was found, she stood up in a panic. "Which mansion do you belong to? Who are you looking for?" Nanny Zhou looked up and down at the servant girl and said coldly. This was Qin's mansion, which was almost the inner yard of Qin's mansion. How did this servant girl sneak in? Was it because the clothes looked a bit like the clothes worn by the servant girls of Qin's mansion? "I am looking for someone." The servant girl looked timid. "Looking for who?" Nanny Zhou became more and more suspicious. Looking for someone. "I don't know if he is in your mansion." The servant girl was very flustered, but it seemed that she did not dare to say it. "Tell me, who is it? How did you get into the mansion? Why did the guards let you in?" Nanny Zhou said coldly. Once again, she could be sure that this servant girl did not belong to Qin's mansion. "I am looking for someone." The servant girl seemed to be really scared. She stepped back and seemed to want to slip away. She stammered and made excuses. It was obvious that she did not want to tell the truth. Chapter 178. The servant girl looked shocked and scared. Her face turned pale and she trembled, but she dared not move. "Tell me, who are you looking for in our mansion?" Nanny Zhou snorted and said, "If it is not a big deal, our mansion will not investigate it." "Looking for Child of Duke." The servant girl lowered her head and said hesitantly, "Child of Duke Yong? Child of Duke Yong's mansion?" Nanny Zhou was stunned. She opened her eyes wide and stared at the servant girl in front of her. The only child in Qin's mansion was Di Yan, who lived in the mansion temporarily. "I am looking for Child D." The servant girl became more timid and a little flustered. "Who is your master in Duke Yong's mansion? Why do you come to Child of Duke Yong's mansion at this time?" Nanny Zhou looked the servant girl up and down again, and her face became cold. This set of clothes did not look like the clothes of Duke Yong's mansion. My miss is not from Duke Yong's mansion." The servant girl had been forced to give in, but she did not dare to escape. She could only explain in a panic, "My miss is the cousin of Child of Duke Yong." She really wants to find Child of Duke Yong for something. Her look and her flustered behavior showed that she did not seem to have nothing to do. Moreover, when Nanny Zhou heard the word cousin, she was very concerned. "Cousin of Child of Duke Yong? Which family's cousin?" "My miss is the niece of Countess Yong. She is talking with Madam now." Suddenly, Madam felt uncomfortable. "My miss panicked and sent me to find Child of Duke Yong." The servant girl pinched the corner of her clothes and stammered. Nanny Zhou sneered. There were so many people in Duke Yong's mansion. Even if something really happened to Countess Yong, why would she be in a hurry to find Child of Duke Yong? If something big happened to Countess Yong, she would not find Child of Duke Yong, but Duke Yong. If it was a trivial matter, why would she come here? Almost in an instant, Nanny Zhou was sure that there was something wrong with this Mississippi. "How did you get into the mansion?" "I said I'm a servant of Duke Yong's mansion and I came to see heir of Duke Yong for something." Most of the things had been told, so the servant girl did not dare to hide anymore. Di Yan's status in Qin's mansion was unusual, so the people at the door certainly didn't dare to stop the servants of his mansion. However, this servant girl had found a loophole and entered the mansion just like that. Is your Miss the Countess's niece? Nanny Zhou continued to ask. You can go to Shitzi. The servant girl was really flustered. She looked around and forced a smile. Nanny, I still have something to do and have to go back to serve Countess Yong. I'll go back first. The servant girl was also smart. She felt that it was impossible for her to see Di Yen in this situation. She might as well think of a way next time. Since heir of Duke Yong's mansion moved into Qin's mansion and heard from the people of Duke Yong's mansion that heir of Duke Yong was going to marry this cousin of the Qin family, Miss had been worried. In fact, she had been waiting outside the mansion for a few days. She just wanted to see Di Yen when he came out. However, people in the mansion did appear from time to time, but there was no one from heir of Duke Yong. In the past, heir of Duke Yong's mansion did not look like a person who could stay at home and would leave the mansion every day. But now he was so peaceful in Qin's mansion, which made her miss more and more uneasy. It was really unexpected that she could come in today. Originally, when she was anxious outside the mansion and had no idea what to do, she heard passers-by say that the servants of Duke Yong's mansion often came in and out of Qin's mansion. They even joked that Duke Yong's mansion regarded Qin's mansion as their own mansion. Even the servants could come in and out at will. When they entered the door, they only needed to say that they were from Duke Yong's mansion. This reminded her. She immediately went to the door and forced herself to say that they were servants of Duke Yong's mansion and came to see heir of Duke Yong's mansion for something important. As expected, the servant at the door let her in and asked her if she wanted to show the way. After she said that she knew the way, the servant at the door let her in by herself. After entering the door, she got lost. Fortunately, she passed by a servant girl. She stepped forward and asked the way. The servant girl was a warm-hearted person. She came over to show her the way and then pointed to Chuehua Gate from a distance to let her go. Originally, she thought that she would see heir of Duke Di soon. Unexpectedly, a shrewd old maid appeared at the door. At first glance, she knew that she was not as easy to fool as the servant girl just now. Hurriedly, she turned around and wanted to avoid it. Unexpectedly, the old maid's eyes were so sharp that she saw her at once and threatened to send her to the official office. Now, the servant girl did not want to see heir of Duke Di anymore. She just wanted to go back as soon as possible. Are you going back to Duke Yong's mansion now? Nanny Zhou asked with a faint smile. Seeing her expression, the servant girl's heart skipped a beat. She had a bad intuition, but at this time, she could not deny it. She could only bite the bullet and said, Yes, I'm going back now. I'm afraid that Madam and Miss will be anxious. What a coincidence. I'm going back too. Let's go together, Nanny Zhou said with a smile. Do. The servant girl was stunned. What? Are you a fake? If you are a fake, then send her to the official office. Nanny Zhou's eyes became sharp, and the smile on her face disappeared instantly. No, of course I am a fake. Then let's go back together. After thinking for a while, the servant girl gritted her teeth and said, After entering the mansion, it should not be difficult for her to find an excuse to slip away. The old maid in front of her did not know her, but people in Duke Yong's mansion knew her. Okay, then let's go. Nanny Zhou narrowed her eyes, looked at the servant girl, and said meaningfully. After they reached an agreement, the two of them walked out together. When the two of them walked far away, Qin Yu came out from behind a tree. Looking at the two of them walking away, a smile appeared on her face. Sure enough, it was as Miss had expected. Once Nanny Zhou saw this servant girl, she would definitely not let her go. She turned around and went to Chuehua Gate. The old maid guarding the gate saw that she was carrying a food basket in her hand, so she let her go without asking anything. Just now, she went out of Chuehua Gate with the excuse of sending snacks to Qin Huayong. When she returned to Jifeng Pavilion, Qin Wanru was sitting in front of the window, talking to Nanny Zheng. Qin Wanru had just demonstrated the etiquette, and it was very standard. Nanny Zheng almost didn't need to demonstrate anything. However, Nanny Zheng felt that it was necessary to tell Qin Wanru in detail about the rules in the palace and the things that should be paid attention to in the palace. When they were talking in detail, Qin Yu lifted the curtain and came in to report, Miss, Nanny Zhou and that servant girl left together. Qin Wanru was not surprised about this situation. In her previous life, this cousin Miss Ning had been in a relationship with Di Yan. Later, she even became Di Yan's mistress. Qin Yuru didn't know how she knew the existence of this cousin Miss Ning, so she led a group of people to beat her. This Miss Ning was delicate and weak, so she fainted on the spot. It was also because of this that Di Yan was furious, and even Countess Yong stood on this cousin Miss Ning's side. For a time, rumors were all over that Qin Yuru was jealous and could not tolerate others. Later, although Duke Xing's mansion helped to suppress the rumors, Duke Yong's mansion still allowed this cousin Miss Ning to marry into Duke Yong's mansion as a concubine. Moreover, it was said that even if she was only a concubine, Duke Yong's mansion also promised that if she gave birth to a child, she would be promoted to a co-wife. After all, this cousin Miss Ning almost became Di Yan's legal wife. The reason seemed to be related to Qin Yuru, which was also the reason why Qin Yuru had to agree later. But it was a little strange when she thought about it. Why did Qin Yuru suddenly let Madame Ning marry into Duke Yong's mansion without crying or making a fuss? Moreover, she even took the initiative to help. According to Qin Yuru's character, she didn't seem to be so easy to talk to. She even offered her such a good condition. After that, it was said that Qin Yuru and Madame Ning got along very well, but Qin Wanru had never seen Madame Ning. It was not because she had never been to Qin's mansion, but because Qin Wanru lived a secluded life at that time. But it was very strange that this cousin didn't give birth to any offspring of Duke Yong's mansion until he died. Coincidentally, Qin Yuru did not give birth either. In summary, Qin Wanru knew that this cousin Miss had some means. Otherwise, she would not be able to enter Duke Yong's mansion under such a disadvantageous situation. With her identity, Duke Yong's mansion would not like her. She was just a niece of Countess Yong. Where has Child Di been these days? Picking up the teacup at hand, Qin Wanru took a sip, and her eyes fell on the smoke rising from the teacup. Child Di spends most of his time at Madame Di's place, and he spends a small part of his time visiting First Mississippi. But he occasionally meets First Miss Chi, and they talk in the garden. Qing Yu answered after thinking for a while. Child Di of Duke Yong? Nanny Zheng asked on the side. Since she sold herself, she also showed her loyalty to Qin Wanru. At this time, when she heard Child Di, she immediately guessed that it was Countess Yong. Before coming to Qin's mansion, Nanny Huang also repeatedly mentioned Madame Qin, saying that she was the daughter of Duke Yong's mansion. At that time, she married into Qin's mansion and gave birth to a daughter, who was First Mississippi. As for Second Miss, she was not Madame Di's daughter, and seemed to be fostered under the name of Madame Di. Therefore, before meeting Qin Wanru, Nanny Zheng thought that she was just a poor daughter of a concubine raised under the name of the official mother. Unexpectedly, what she saw was not a timid little girl at all. And what Qin Wanru said next made her even more convinced, and she even sold herself. If someone told Nanny Zheng that she would sell herself before coming to Qin's mansion, she must think that person was crazy. Since she really regarded Qin Wanru as her master, she felt that she must tell Qin Wanru something. Compared with Qin Wanru who just arrived in the capital, Nanny Zheng knew a lot of things. It's Child Di of Duke Yong's mansion. The mansion means that Qin Yuru may marry him. Qin Wanru nodded and didn't hide it from her. This Child Di has a bad reputation. In the past, he also snatched a woman from someone outside. It seems that the woman was a young prostitute in a brothel. They quarreled fiercely, and someone even accused him in the Imperial court. Nanny Zheng thought for a while and found some things about this Child Di from her memory. Although she was not in the palace, she was the chief palace maid at that time, so some words naturally came to her ears. Snatched a woman? Qin Wanru really didn't know there was such a thing. She looked surprised and asked, who did he snatch her from? It seems to be a son of a relative who has a relationship with Duke Xing's mansion, but he is not the son of Duke Xing's mansion. I don't remember the specific details. Anyway, it was a big trouble. Not only did Child Di lose face, but also the people of Duke Yong's mansion. Nanny Zheng said. Chapter 179. It seems so, but I can't remember it clearly. It seems to be a very common surname. He is a nephew of Duke Xing. I heard that because of this, Duke Xing was so angry that he beat him half to death, and so did Child D of Duke Yong's mansion. As for the young prostitute who caused trouble, she was sold far away. Later, this matter became a joke in the palace. Both of them were beaten several times, and the matter was settled. But because of this, Di Yen became the representative of the libertine in the capital city. Nanny Zheng, do you know who Child D was going to be engaged to before? Qin Wanru asked with her eyes down. Her hand holding the cup slowly relaxed, and her lips slightly curved with a trace of sarcasm. She really didn't expect that in such a big world, she could actually hear the news about the libertine that Madame D had arranged for her in the last life. I don't know about this, but it seems that because of this, the family of the girl that Child D was going to be engaged to objected, and then they said it was okay. I don't know the details. Nanny Zheng was in the palace at that time, so she heard a lot and knew a little. She took a deep breath, suppressed the rolling coldness in her heart, and raised her head again, and her face had returned to normal. Since some things couldn't be avoided, then there was no need to hide. Yu Jie, are the new clothes in the sewing room ready? Taking a deep breath, Qin Wanru turned to Yu Jie and asked. Not yet. The supervisor of the sewing room said that it was the first time to sew clothes for masters and ladies, so they must do well. It may be a little slow, but the finished products will definitely satisfy you. Yu Jie just came back from the sewing room, and hearing Qin Wanru's question, she answered hurriedly. Did you see first Miss Chi's person? Qin Wanru raised her eyebrows. Yes, I did. I took a detour to see who it was. It was Chuani, Miss Chi's servant girl. She was very enthusiastic when she saw me and asked me what I was going to do. I answered according to what you said. Chuani especially asked you what patterns you would embroider on the clothes, and then she hurriedly ran away. Thinking of Chun-Yi stopping her to inquire about the news, Yu Jie actually felt quite speechless. This first Miss Chi's thoughts were almost written on her face. She was an unmarried miss who was not related to Child D. Was it really good for her to send someone to stop her and ask about Child D's news? However, this was also what Yu Jie needed. She went out today to lure Qi Rongji to the needlework room. She praised the craftsmanship of the needlework room as if it was the best in the world. She also described the characteristics of the clothes in Jiangzhou as nothing special. She also said that people in the capital liked to embroider beautiful embroidery patterns on the corners of skirts. This first Miss Chi, who had always wanted to be in the limelight, would definitely be tempted to have a look. Since things had been arranged properly, Qin Wanru did not say anything more. She asked the two servant girls to follow her to listen to Nanny Zheng's rules and things to pay attention to. The next few days seemed to be very peaceful, but Madame D seemed to be very busy. From time to time, Nanny Zhou could be seen traveling between Qin's mansion and Duke Yong's mansion. She even brought a few old maids from Duke Yong's mansion, saying that they were sent by old Madame of Duke Yong's mansion to take care of Madame D. Of course, this had nothing to do with Qin Wanru. No matter how noisy Madame D was, it didn't affect her. Of course, this was not only because of Qin Huaiyong's warning, but also because Madame D couldn't free herself now. Di Yen and Miss Ning had been friends for a long time, and maybe the Ning family always thought that their daughter could marry into Duke Yong's mansion. Qin Yuru suddenly appeared out of nowhere, and it was not easy to become the wife of Child D. When Qi Rongji came over, Qin Wanru was not too surprised. After inviting her into the room and sitting down, she asked someone to make tea and bring it in. Qi Rongji came in with a smile, and it was obvious that she was in a good mood. The clothes she was wearing were also new and very fashionable. It was indeed the current style in the capital city. It should be sent to her when Qi Tianyu came to the mansion last time. However, these days she met Di Yen in the garden every day, so no matter how many new clothes she had worn all of them at least once. With Qi Rongji's temperament, how could she not want to make some new clothes? Sister Wanru, the clothes made in the sewing room. Did you draw the embroidery patterns yourself? Qi Rongji came straight to the point as soon as she entered the room. Can you also let me use the patterns? I want to make a few sets of clothes, otherwise I won't have clothes to wear when I go out. I heard that there will be a flower appreciating banquet in the capital city. Don't you have a lot of clothes? Qin Wanru looked at her clothes reluctantly and said, They have all been worn. If I wear them out at that time, not only will you think it's not good, I will also think it's not good. Qi Rongji said matter-of-factly. When she was in Jiangzhou, she liked to make clothes the most. Every time she saw beautiful materials or clothes that looked good, she would sell them. Therefore, every time she went out, she would wear different clothes. It was like this when she was in Jiangzhou, and now she dressed for the man who liked her. I like that style very much. Qin Wanru said hesitantly. It doesn't matter if you like it. We can wear similar clothes. Isn't it better to look? Qi Rongji looked up and down at Qin Wanru's small body and said with contempt. Wearing similar clothes could make people clearly distinguish which one looked good and which one did not. Compared with Qi Rongji's small body, Qin Wanru was a joke. At that time, others would only think that Qin Wanru copied her embroidery pattern and imitated her. She would definitely be the joke. Qi Rongji was still very confident about this, so she came to ask Qin Wanru for embroidery patterns. As for whether Qin Wanru would be laughed at in the end, it was not within her consideration. Moreover, she was very happy to see Qin Wanru being laughed at. With a person like Qin Wanru, who was as small as a bean's teeth, as a reference, everyone would see that she was outstanding. We are not sisters. What's so good about wearing the same clothes? Qin Wanru looked at her and said with a serious face. It was obvious that she was very unwilling. I live in your Qin's mansion and wear similar clothes to you, which also means that you really take good care of me. My parents will also thank you when they know, and others will also think that your Qin's mansion is benevolent and righteous. Qi Rongji felt that she was in a good mood, so she did not intend to hold a grudge against Qin Wanru. Moreover, she also decided to appear in front of Child D in the future with a gentle and dignified look. She should put away her temper in the past. I don't want it to be exactly the same. Qin Wanru said angrily. Then I will ask the sewing room to embroider it for me. Qi Rongji said with a smile. She thought that if someone had a problem with the embroidery pattern on their clothes, she would definitely say that Qin Wanru saw her drawing and copied it. Since she had said what she wanted to say, Qi Rongji felt that there was nothing else to say to Qin Wanru. She stood up and was about to leave, but when she heard the following words from Qin Wanru, she sat down again. Yu Jie, is Child D still in our mansion these days? These days, she did not see Di Yen and did not know what he was busy with. She wanted to deliberately meet him, but she did not see him. She was very confused at first, but she also knew that it was really inconvenient to ask about Di Yen. If Madame D and Qin Yuru knew about it, there would definitely be a dispute. It was best to ask about it from Qin Wanru. After sitting down again, she picked up the teacup on the table and took a sip, but her ears were tightly listening to the conversation between Qin Wanru and Yu Jie. Miss, I heard that something happened in Duke Yong's mansion. Not only Child D, but also First Miss has been running to Duke Yong's mansion these days. Yu Jie answered. What happened? Qin Wanru asked casually. Qi Rongji blinked her eyes and listened more carefully. She slightly lowered her head, but her attention was all on Qin Wanru and Yu Jie. I don't know, but that day, I heard Nanny Zhou and Mei Shui, who was serving First Miss, said. When Yu Jie said this, she seemed to look at Qi Rongji and felt a little afraid. She leaned over and whispered in Qin Wanru's ear. This sentence was very light. Even if Qi Rongji stretched her ears, she could only hear a few words, but she still sensitively found that these two words were, women. Forget it. This is the matter of big sister and madam. Let them be. Qin Wanru waved her hand and said casually. She turned her eyes to Qi Rongji and said, Miss Qi, is there anything else? This was an impolite way of asking a guest to leave. Knowing that Qin Wanru would not say anything to her, Qi Rongji snorted coldly. She stood up, looked at Qin Wanru proudly and turned to leave. When she was at the door, she met Nanny Yu face to face. When she saw the big red invitation in Nanny Yu's hand, Qi Rongji decided that it was okay to sit down and have a look. So she turned back to the chair and sat down without hesitation. She said as if it was a matter of course, See which mansion sent the invitation. Is it an invitation for us to attend the banquet? It seems that my clothes will be ready soon. Qin Wanru ignored her talking to herself. She picked up the invitation and was stunned for a moment. It was from Duke Xing's mansion. Duke Xing's mansion had asked Ru, and great elder princess, to send an invitation to her. She had sent the invitation to her father, but her father had refused it. Where did this invitation come from? Qin Wanru frowned and asked. Nanny Duan brought some people here, and they are still outside. Nanny Yu pointed outside and said softly. Did this mean that the people were still here? Qin Wanru frowned slightly. For a moment, she could not understand why Duke Xing's mansion was so persistent. The people from Duke Xing's mansion are also here? That's great. Sister Wanru, please invite them in quickly. It's not good to neglect the distinguished guests. Chun-Yi, please make a trip for Sister Wanru and invite them. Hearing Nanny Yu's words clearly, Qi Rongji stood up excitedly. She was overjoyed and made the decision on her own. Yes, I'll go right away. Hearing her words, Chun-Yi hurriedly walked out, but was stopped by Yu Jie at the door. Chapter 180. Qin Wanru had always wondered what kind of mentality Qi Rongji used to add fuel to the fire and give advice to Qin Yuru in the last life, and then watched her fall into the abyss of pain and despair with pleasure. Qin Wanru had no grudge against Qi Rongji. But now, she didn't want to know anymore. Some people were naturally frightened and malicious. As long as it wasn't her own, she could step on anyone else. Even if it was just for her, even if it was for her sake, she felt that it was only right. She slightly raised the corner of her mouth, and her eyes became colder. First Miss Qi, please. Qi Rongji didn't expect that Qin Wanru would not give her face at this time. She was so angry that her face turned pale and her lips trembled. Qin Wanru, how dare you, say such words? Why don't I dare? First Miss Qi, please recognize your situation and see clearly that this place belongs to Qin. Qin Wanru sneered and said lightly. Qi Rongji almost couldn't control her breath. But when she thought that there were people of Duke Xing's mansion outside the door, she gritted her teeth and endured it. Qin Wanru, don't be so sure. Maybe you will ask me for help in the future. Qi Rongji stamped her feet and threatened her with hatred. She had to turn around and leave. But when she reached the door, the anger on her face had disappeared. When the servant girl lifted the curtain, Qi Rongji appeared in front of everyone with a dignified and elegant look. She looked up at Nanny Duan standing in the corridor, walked over and greeted politely, Nanny Duan. Miss Qi. Nanny Duan hurriedly greeted her. Nanny Duan, why do you have time to visit Sister Wanru today? How is Madame Dowager? When I went to see Madame Dowager this morning, she hadn't gotten up yet. Qi Rongji said with a smile. Those who didn't know would really think that Qi Rongji respected Madame Dowager a lot. The morning she went to see Madame Dowager was actually a few days ago. Qi Rongji didn't meet Di Yan these days, so she got up early and wanted to meet Di Yan. For this reason, she specially went to Madame Dowager to say good morning. The reason was that a servant girl said that she saw Di Yan and Qin Yuru go to greet Madame Dowager together. Because she got up too early, old grandma was not up yet, so Qi Rongji hurried back to stop them. Although Nanny Duan did not know why Qi Rongji came to greet old grandma so early in the morning that day, she knew there must be something else when she saw Qi Rongji leave in a hurry and look absent-minded. Greeting old grandma was just an excuse. Miss Qi, old madam is in good health. When you came to pay your respects a few days ago, old madam was not up yet. I wanted to talk to you these few days, but I didn't expect you to be absent for the past few days. Qi Rongji looked at old madam and said, Miss Qi, old madam is in good health. Nanny Duan said with a smile. The displeasure in her eyes was hidden behind her smile. After working for old grandma for so many years, she had seen all kinds of people. She smiled at Qi Rongji's words, which did not match her heart, and said meaningfully. Qi Rongji's smile froze. This meant that she had not visited old grandma for so many days. But she reacted quickly and smiled again, as if she did not understand the meaning of Nanny Duan's words. She looked at an old maid beside Nanny Duan and said with a smile, I will talk to old grandma later. Nanny Duan, is she from the mansion? Why haven't I seen her before? After saying that, she looked the old maid up and down with a smile. This is a nanny of Duke Xing's mansion. She sent an invitation to our mansion, and old grandma asked me to bring her here. Nanny Duan answered. The banquet of Duke Xing's mansion? Sister Wanru and Sister Yuru will go there? That's great. After I came to the capital city, old grandma, Sister Yuru and Sister Wanru have been very kind to me. Sister Yuru was going to take me out last time, but I was sick. Now I have finally recovered. Qi Rongji's eyes lit up and she said with a smile. Nanny Duan did not know what to say. Miss Qi was really shameless. She said that as if she did not take her out this time, it would be bad to her. In front of the people of Duke Xing's mansion, Nanny Duan could not say no. She could only put on a superficial smile and said, Miss Qi is right. The old maid of Duke Xing's mansion looked her up and down and said with a smile, It's the best that Miss Qi can come. The invitation was rejected before, but it was really not known whether it would be accepted this time. The old maid of Duke Xing's mansion was actually very curious about what was wrong with her master and why she had to invite this family. It was just a family of officials who had just arrived in the capital city. With the status of Duke Xing's mansion, it was really unnecessary to be so accommodating. Just now in old grandma's place, old grandma repeatedly said that she was not in good health and might not be able to come, and the two madams in the mansion were also not in good health and could not go. As for the two misses, old grandma said it was better to ask them. Because they mainly invited the second Miss Qin, old grandma asked someone to bring her here. Although the miss in front of her was not the second Miss Qin, it seemed that she had a close relationship with the Qin family. If she went, the two misses of Qin's mansion would also go. Thinking in this way, the old maid of Duke Xing's mansion certainly agreed with a smile. After getting the words of the old maid of Duke Xing's mansion, Qi Rongji was very proud and her face became more and more pleasant. After nodding and agreeing, she went out of the courtyard with her servant girl. Standing at the gate of the courtyard and seeing the old maid of Duke Xing's mansion enter the room, she turned in the direction of the sewing room. She had new materials. When making clothes, she would embroider the embroidery patterns that Qin Wanru had sketched on them. She had to ask the people in the sewing room to work faster. It was the first time that she appeared in the capital city, so she had to amaze people with a brilliant feat with Qin Wanru on her side. It was not difficult. The old maid of Duke Xing's mansion followed Nanny Yu into the door. After entering the door, she saw a young miss sitting on the couch in the middle of the room. She looked so delicate that she almost came out of the painting, but she was not old and looked childish. If she grew up with such a look, she would be an extremely beautiful woman. She just sat there. Although she was small, she had an extraordinary bearing. There were two servant girls standing on each side quietly. At a glance, the old maid of Duke Xing's mansion felt that the miss in front of her could not be underestimated. While serving in the capital, he had seen many people, and all of them were sharp and intelligent. With one look, he could tell that this young lady was extraordinary. Her bearing and appearance were definitely one of the best, even if she was still a child. Even if she was just a child now, her future would be limitless. The old maid suddenly understood why her master invited this miss to the banquet again and again. Even if this miss refused, she specially sent her here. Even if she didn't say anything, her bearing was incomparable to that of the miss who just went out of the door. Or it could be said that there was no comparison at all. This is our second miss. Nanny Duan introduced on the side. The old maid hurriedly took 2 steps forward and bowed deeply to Qin Wanru. She behaved very respectfully and said, I pay my respects to second Miss Qin. You are? Qin Wanru looked up and down at the old maid and asked. I was sent by old madam of Duke Xing's mansion. I heard that second miss saved our master Hao and our old madam was very grateful, so she wanted to meet second miss and thank you in person. It happened that there was a banquet in the mansion, so she asked and great elder princess to send the invitation card here. Unexpectedly, General Qin refused it. Old madam thought that this was the business of womenfolk, and there would be many misses in the mansion at that time. Second Miss Qin was at the right age, so she might like it more, so she asked me to go there again. The old maid of Duke Xing's mansion was very good at talking and very respectful. When she entered the door, she only glanced at Qin Wanru when she came in. After that, she had been well behaved and didn't even raise her head. Father's meaning? I am afraid that I am still young and I should not go out too much when I just arrived in the capital city, Qin Wanru said softly. Second miss, if you like quiet, you can go to old madam's place to have a chat. Old madam just wants to thank second miss and see what second miss who can save master how looks like. I heard that you are also a child, so old madam wants to thank you even more. The old maid replied cleverly. Obviously, she had prepared these words long ago, and her words were very pleasing. But grandmother and mother are not going. I am afraid that it is not appropriate for me to go. Qin Wanru refused calmly. Not only second miss, but also first miss and Miss Qi just now. I heard that these misses have just arrived in the capital city. It is also an opportunity to attend the banquet together and chat with the misses in the capital city. You can't not be with them because you are not familiar with the misses in the capital city. The old maid said with a smile and even borrowed Qi Rongji's influence. Although she didn't know Qi Rongji's identity, she just saw that Qi Rongji's words and deeds showed an unusual relationship with Qin's mansion. Of course, she would use her as a topic. This. Qin Wanru hesitated. Miss, you should go. First Miss has been in the capital city for a period of time and knows a lot of people. If she takes you there, she will definitely take good care of you. Yujia also persuaded on the side. Yes, miss, you should go. There is nothing to do in the mansion all day long. You should associate with the misses from other mansions. Maybe you can find some good friends and have a good relationship with them in the future. Qin Yu also persuaded. The words of the old maid of Duke Xing's mansion just now were deeply rooted in people's hearts. Hearing what the two servant girls said, Qin Wanru seemed to be a little moved. After thinking for a while, she finally pushed this topic away. Nanny, since Big Sister is leading the team, can you go to ask her? If she thinks she can go, then go. If she thinks she can't go, then forget it. Qin Wanru said as if she was following Qin Yuru's lead. Then please lead the way, Nanny Duan. When the old maid of Duke Xing's mansion came over, she knew that second Miss Qin might not be willing. Otherwise, she would not have returned the invitation card. Now seeing that Qin Wanru had been moved, she immediately said to Nanny Duan with a smile. When first Miss Qin came here, the mansion had already sent a message. It was said that first Miss Qin liked bustling and should be willing to go. Thank you, Nanny Duan. Qin Wanru turned to Nanny Duan and said softly. Then I will take her to see first Miss. Nanny Duan responded. After saying goodbye to Qin Wanru, she led people out. Chapter 181. The invitation to attend the banquet in Duke Xing's mansion was settled. Duke Xing's mansion sent the invitation card again and invited them with great sincerity, so Qin Huaiyong and Madame Dowager couldn't refuse it again. Duke Xing's mansion was different from Duke Yong's mansion. Although the current Duke Xing didn't have many achievements, the last two generations of Duke Xing were important ministers of the emperor. Madame D definitely couldn't go, but Shui Rulin was not pregnant yet, so she could go. Qin Huaiyong and Madame Dowager discussed it and decided to let Shui Rulin take Qin Yuru and Qin Wanru. Because Qi Rongji showed up before and talked with the old maid of Duke Xing's mansion, it was not good to not take her. This was the official appearance of the two misses of Qin's mansion together. Madame Dowager attached great importance to it and specially invited two etiquette instructors to train them on etiquette and behavior at this kind of banquet. Although it was not the first time for them to show up together in the capital city and amaze everyone, at least they could behave decently and look like sisters. Madame Dowager was very disappointed with Qin Yuru now, like Qin Huaiyong. But anyway, she was Qin Huaiyong's biological daughter, so she couldn't let her go like this. She had to teach her well. Madame Dowager was very satisfied with Nanny Huang who taught Qin Yuru. After telling them, she asked them to learn etiquette in her own yard even without coming to pay respects these days. Seeing that Qin Yuru and Qin Wanru were both taught by etiquette instructors, Qi Rongji also wanted to teach etiquette instructors. She went to tell Madame Dowager that she also wanted to learn etiquette with Qin Yuru. She hoped that Nanny Huang could teach Qin Yuru with her. If it was not convenient, she could watch by herself. Since Nanny Huang had said so, Madame Dowager naturally couldn't let her watch by the side. She asked someone to take her to Qin Yuru's yard and let Nanny Huang teach her. A few days passed by in the blink of an eye. Early in the morning, all of the masters of the Qin mansion woke up. Even the old madam woke up early. When she saw that her two granddaughters were dressed up properly, a trace of a smile appeared on her face. She was very satisfied with their attire. They looked like sisters who were very close. Qin Yuru was dressed in a light blue gown and a light purple long skirt with 8 stripes. She had a belt around her waist. Her black hair was combed up, and 3 strings of bright and round beads were hanging down from the hairpin she had picked up, which made her look even more beautiful and charming. Today, Qi Rongji was wearing a light yellow dress. It was a pleated skirt embroidered with silver threads. The hem of the skirt was embellished with pearls. It was fitting and beautiful. When the wind blew, the hem of the skirt fluttered slightly. She was as beautiful as a dream. She was dressed especially charmingly today. Although she was only 13 years old, she had already dressed up like a 15 or 16-year-old girl. Standing beside Qin Yuru, she looked more like a pair of sisters. Qin Wanru's style of dressing was different from theirs. She wore a light pink coat and a skirt that changed from light pink to light white. She was not tall and looked young. Her black hair was tied up in 2 buns and inserted with 2 butterfly hairpins. The 2 hairpins were inserted into her black hair, which made her look more delicate. Seeing that they were well dressed, Madame Dowager nodded with satisfaction. She told them some things that they needed to pay attention to and then let Shui Rulin take them away. Are the embroidery patterns on their clothes the same? Why do they look so familiar? After they left, Madame Dowager murmured and asked, I also think they look familiar, but I can't recognize them. Although the embroidery patterns of the 3 misses are similar, they are not exactly the same. Maybe the sewing room found the patterns according to the different temperaments of the 3 misses. Nanny Duan said with a smile. Maybe. Madame Dowager smiled and also thought this was the most likely answer. The clothes of the 3 misses were all newly made. Even Qi Rongji's clothes were made by the sewing room. It was possible that the 3 sets of clothes had something in common. Moreover, it was not bad. The clothes of the 3 misses looked similar, which made people think that the sisters of the Qin's mansion were harmonious and had a good relationship with Qi Rongji. Now there were some rumors outside, which were all about Madame D and Qin Yuru. These words were not pleasant to hear. Nanny Duan had mentioned it to Madame Dowager in private several times. If they could go out this time, they could let others see that the sisters of Qin's mansion were harmonious and didn't fight with each other with their faces swollen. There were 2 carriages prepared by the Qin's mansion. Of course, Qin Wanru was in one carriage with Shui Rulin, while Qin Yuru and Qi Rongji went to the carriage behind. When they all got on the carriage moved slowly. One after another, they left the Qin's mansion and went to Duke Xing's mansion. Duke Xing's mansion was far from the Qin's mansion, which was the real center of the capital city. The house of the Qin's mansion was left by the ancestors. Although it was good, it was still on the periphery of the capital city. Along the way, they almost passed through several busy streets. Qin Wanru asked Yujie to pull down the curtain and sat by the window to watch with relish. Wanru. Shui Rulin looked at Qin Wanru and wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Mother, what do you want to say? Qin Wanru turned around and asked with a smile. Go to Duke Xing's mansion later and don't run around. Shui Rulin said softly. Duke Xing's mansion sent invitation cards again and again, which made her feel uneasy. She was not an important family, but Duke Xing's mansion attached too much importance to her. Mother, I'm fine. Be careful in case someone offends you. Qin Wanru saw Shui Rulin's worry and immediately said with a smile. Before going out this time, Qin Wanru specially asked Madame Dowager to assign 2 strong old maids to Shui Rulin, just in case of any accidents. I know. I won't go anywhere at that time. I'll just stay in the room and talk with those madams. Before coming here, Shui Rulin had already thought about what she would do next. Originally, she wanted to show her face with Qin Yuru and Qin Yuru to show that there were elders with them. Otherwise, it would be very impolite for two girls to come here for the first time. Mother, if someone asks about Madame D later, what will you say? Qin Wanru said with a smile. She could be sure that someone would ask about this later, so she should give Shui Rulin a good foundation first. Her words made Shui Rulin silent for a while. After thinking for a while, she said indifferently, "She is ill." "Why is she ill?" Qin Wanru continued to ask with a smile. "She is not acclimatized to the climate." Shui Rulin laughed. After saying this, Qin Wanru also burst into laughter. Madame D's injury really couldn't be mentioned. Could it be said that Madame D and Qin Huayong fought and hurt herself, or that she was poured medicine on her hands and scalded her face? Although such a statement was ridiculous, it was Madame D who was ridiculous. Even if the people of Duke Yong's mansion were here, they would not come out to refute. "Mother, if they ask about you, what will you say?" Qin Wanru reached out to hold Shui Rulin's hand and said softly. The fact that Shui Rulin had married and became a widow couldn't be hidden at all. How could Madame D not spread this out? "They won't ask me face to face, will they?" The smile on Shui Rulin's face faded, and she hesitated and said, "Mother, I think they will." Qin Wanru looked at Shui Rulin seriously and said, "There were some things that couldn't be avoided. Someone would definitely pick out this kind of embarrassing question. Blindly avoiding the problem couldn't solve the problem at all." Qin Wanru didn't want Shui Rulin to be suppressed when she just dated a madam of an aristocratic family in the capital city. If Madame D didn't come, this would be the best opportunity. Shui Rulin's eyes fell on Qin Wanru's face. Qin Wanru's small and delicate face was tight, which made her look like a little adult. Her snow-white skin and red lips all showed that she was still a child, but this child was worried about Shui Rulin in every way. "Wanru, don't worry. Even if they talk about this in front of me, I won't care." Shui Rulin was not stupid. She touched Qin Wanru's temples and said gently, no matter how bad she was still an adult. "Mother, I will follow you then." Qin Wanru rolled her watery eyes and said with a pun, "It doesn't matter. You can play by yourself for a while." Shui Rulin smiled helplessly. This child was really worried. She was at the age where she liked to play the most. It was really restricting her to follow her all the time. Although Shui Rulin was worried about her, she couldn't really restrict her to death. "Mother, I have no place to go to play. Let Big Sister and Miss Chi go to play. They look more like sisters." Qin Wanru said meaningfully. When they got on the car just now, they were so modest that people who didn't know the truth would really think that they were biological sisters. "Then follow me." Shui Rulin was actually worried about Qin Wanru. She thought for a while and said, she had a lot of doubts about the matter that Duke Xing's mansion repeatedly sent invitation cards to Qin Wanru. She had talked about it with Madame Dowager before, but because she didn't know whether there was such a practice in the capital city, she couldn't figure out the meaning of Duke Xing's mansion for a while. If Duke Xing's mansion really appreciated and valued the child so much, they could directly come to thank Qin Wanru. Why did they have to invite Wanru over and put on a very grateful look? Shui Rulin had a feeling that since Duke Xing's mansion had sent invitation cards one after another, Wanru would not be so low-key at today's banquet. Looking at the small face in front of her, Shui Rulin frowned. She was still a child. Was it really good to appear in front of everyone in such a high profile? At that time, she would take one step at a time and must carefully protect this child. Shui Rulin secretly made up her mind. Before they arrived at the gate of Duke Xing's mansion, the road had been blocked. There were carriages coming in front of them, blocking all the way forward. It could be seen that there were many people attending the banquet in Duke Xing's mansion today. In this situation, the whole circle of dignitaries in the capital city might be mobilized. Duke Xing's mansion was still as prosperous as in her previous life. Even if it was not a royal family, its honor was not comparable to other families. Chapter 182. We are. The coachman looked at the old maid who asked the question and said, "They are really from Qin's mansion. Then follow me. Let's go that way. There are fewer people there." Seeing that she found them, the old maid of Duke Xing's mansion was very happy and reached out to lead them to the side. She had asked many carriages along the way, and they all said that they were not from Qin's mansion. Now that she found them, she naturally led them in according to the request of the mansion. "Let's go," Shui Rulin said to the coachman outside. The coachman hurriedly turned the horse around and turned to a road on the side. There was also a side door, but obviously not everyone could enter that side door. The gate was very crowded, but this side door was not. Seeing the two carriages passing by, some madams and ladies who had been waiting also looked at them and were guessing their identities. Some of them had guessed it, and some of them hadn't. The carriage followed the old maid into the side door, and then came to a place after turning all the way. The carriage stopped. Qianghua and Yujia lifted the curtain and let Shui Rulin and Qin Wanru get off the carriage. Behind them, Qin Yuru and Qi Rongji also got off. The spacious parking lot was neat and surrounded by tall trees. There were only a few carriages parked here. Just by looking at the appearance of these carriages, one could tell that they were not used by ordinary manners. Every carriage was spacious and gorgeous. The Qin residence's carriage was originally not bad, but when it stopped at the side, it immediately looked a little shabby and small. Qin Wanru frowned. The gate was so crowded, and there were so many carriages. It seemed that they were not parked here. "Madam Qin, Miss Qin, please come with me. Our madam has been waiting for you for a long time," the old maid said with a smile and reached out to lead the way. "Your madam?" Shui Rulin turned her eyes and asked. "Our madam is Madam of Duke Xing. She has been waiting for you for a long time." The old maid smiled with a friendly attitude. Shui Rulin looked at Qin Wanru, and Qin Wanru nodded silently. They just followed the old maid and walked forward together. The first impression that Duke Xing's mansion gave Qin Wanru was that it was so big that she couldn't even reach the end of it. However, the layout seemed to be a little different. The place where they came from before was dominated by tall trees, while the middle section was dominated by flowers and plants. Now the section they were walking through was dominated by the elegant charm of the south of the Yangtze River. Seeing such different styles in one mansion, it could be seen that Duke Xing's mansion was prosperous. Gradually, they met more and more people. Most of them walked along the same road, and no one led them. On the contrary, the old maid of Duke Xing's mansion led the way in front of Qin Wanru and her entourage. She whispered respectfully from time to time, as if she was introducing something. For a time, many madams and misses turned their eyes to them. They were all guessing who they were and why Duke Xing's mansion treated them like this. Qin Yuru and Qi Rongji liked the feeling of being the center of attention. They followed Shui Rulin with a gentle and dignified look. At first glance, they really looked like a pair of sisters. These two beautiful and decent-looking sisters naturally attracted a lot of attention. Under everyone's gaze, they entered a flower hall. There were already a lot of people in the flower hall. At this time, many people were laughing and talking. One of the madams in the middle was Madam of Duke Xing. She was not particularly beautiful, but her manners and behavior made people feel comfortable. She was also kind to others. It seemed that no matter what you said, she would listen to you wholeheartedly. It wasn't easy for someone of her status to do this. While greeting the guests, she listened to others talking and said something with a smile from time to time. Every time she said something to the point, everyone felt that Madame of Duke Xing was slick and could handle things with ease. Besides, she had the best temper and character. An old maid hurriedly came over and whispered in her ear. The smile on her face became wider. She stood up happily and said, "Second Miss Qin is here. Hurry up and invite her over," she ordered softly. Second Miss Qin? Several madams sitting around her were stunned for a moment. They didn't understand who this second Miss Qin was and why she made Madam of Duke Xing so happy. "Who is second Miss Qin?" A madam couldn't help asking. "I don't know." "I don't know either." "I don't know." Everyone guessed that it was a famous noble lady in the capital city, but they didn't think there was such a person. Madam of Duke Xing didn't gossip with them and followed the old maid to welcome them. Seeing that Madam of Duke Xing welcomed them in person, everyone was too surprised. The crowd involuntarily separated to two sides, revealing Shui Rulin and others who had just stepped into the door. The huge flower hall immediately became quiet, and everyone's eyes fell on them. As soon as they entered the hall, they became the focus of everyone's attention. Qin Wanru frowned slightly. Was Duke Xing's mansion going to build momentum for her or for themselves? Compared with building momentum for herself, she was more willing to believe that it was the latter. At this time, Madame of Duke Xing came over with several servant girls and old maids. The old maid who led the way before introduced with a smile, "This is our Madame of Duke Xing. Madam, this is second Miss Qin." The old maid pointed at Qin Wanru. Madame of Duke Xing's eyes fell on Qin Wanru's face kindly, and she smiled kindly. Then she turned to Shui Rulin and said, "Madame Shui, you finally come. Please come in." Madame of Duke Xing called Shui Rulin's surname directly. It seemed that she had also inquired about Shui Rulin. Although Shui Rulin had never seen such a scene, she also calmed down at this time. She bowed deeply to Madame of Duke Xing, and then said politely, "Thank you, Madam." Madame of Duke Xing warmly made way for them all the way, and even led several people to move forward. It could be seen that the madam sitting in the front seat had a higher status. Shui Rulin followed after a few steps and stopped. "Madame of Duke Xing, let's sit on the side. It's not appropriate for us to go there." It's not appropriate. If second Miss Qin hadn't saved Hao, he would have been in trouble this time. I took him to and great elder princess's mansion. If something really happened, I couldn't absolve myself from the blame. The smile on Madame of Duke Xing's face became more and more kind and touching. When she turned to Qin Wanru, there was a kind of kindness in her eyes. "Madam, you are too serious." Wanru just helped him conveniently. Shui Rulin said softly. She was neither humble nor arrogant and looked very natural, but she didn't move anymore. Madame of Duke Xing was polite to her because of the identity of Qin's mansion. But if Shui Rulin didn't know what to do and really followed them, she would be a little embarrassed. Second Miss Qin is smart and kind. What a good girl. She looks so good. I like her at first sight. I will give her to you. Seeing that Shui Rulin didn't move, Madame of Duke Xing didn't force her. She also stopped, turned around and looked Qin Wanru up and down carefully. After nodding repeatedly, she took off a pair of bracelets from her wrist, walked over, picked up Qin Wanru's hand, and was about to put them on for her. The bracelet was just taken off from her hand. Not to mention that the bracelet was clear and it was obviously valuable, the way she took off the bracelet directly had made Qin Wanru feel extremely honored. Qin Wanru stepped back calmly, but her hand was held by Shui Rulin and she couldn't step back for a while. She could only look up at Shui Rulin with a very embarrassed look. "Madame of Duke Xing, how can you do this? She is just a child. How can she accept such a valuable gift?" Shui Rulin hurried over to stop her. "Madame Shui, don't mind it. It is just a bracelet. I think this child is really destined to wear it and I like her very much." Madame of Duke Xing put the bracelets on Qin Wanru's hand. The bracelets were too big, and her hand was too small. After shaking for a while, she almost fell off. Shui Rulin was so scared that she reached out to hold her hand hurriedly. Madame of Duke Xing is so polite. Wanru thanks Madame of Duke Xing. Since the bracelets had been put on, it seemed a little impolite to take them off at this time. Shui Rulin said helplessly, "Thank you, Madame of Duke Xing." Qin Wanru smiled slightly, stepped forward naturally and bowed to Madame of Duke Xing. Then she took off the bracelets, which were so wide that they were about to fall off, handed them to Yu Jie beside her, and deliberately lowered her voice to tell her to put them away carefully. Her actions were as smooth as floating clouds and flowing water. She had both the calmness of a miss from an aristocratic family and a little childish, which was very similar to her current age. Originally, many people thought that Madame of Duke Xing favored a miss whom they had never heard of, and they were not happy in their hearts. Now seeing this, several people laughed. She was a child. Although it was appropriate, she was just a child after all. At this time, some people who knew what happened in Great Elder Princess's mansion had quietly spread the news. For a moment, Almost everyone present knew that this was the savior of the little devil of Duke Xing's mansion. No wonder Madame of Duke Xing thought so highly of her. It turned out that it was because of this. However, Duke Xing's mansion really did a good job. They actually gave such a little girl such a big face. You're welcome. Do you want to go to the garden to have a look first? There are many kinds of chrysanthemums in the garden, and some of them are treasures from the palace. Madame of Duke Xing said with a smile. Most of the young misses in the flower hall were madams, and few of them stayed here. Basically, they all went to enjoy the flowers. Madame of Duke Xing said, glancing at Qin Yuru and Qi Rongji, and then sliding her eyes over the corners of their skirts. She suddenly smiled in her heart, but her smile was as gentle as ever. Thank you, Madame of Duke Xing. But I'd better sit here. You're one room, Miss Qi, how about you? Shui Rulin said. She had been very tired all the way, and she really didn't want to move at this time. I'll stay with you. Wanru and Sister Rongji go to play. Qin Yuru finally got such an opportunity to show off, and immediately showed a dignified expression and said. This was taught by Nanny Huang, but in fact, she really didn't want to sit here with Shui Rulin. Big sister, you go to play. I'm tired and I'll sit here with my mother for a while. Qin Wanru pulled Shui Rulin's sleeves and said with a bit of a coquettish tone. She shook her sleeves, and the embroidered patterns of orchids were displayed in front of Madame of Duke Xing. Chapter 183. Yuru, go for a walk with Miss Qi. If Wanru doesn't want to go out, she can accompany me. Shui Rulin said with a smile. Qin Yuru breathed a deep sigh of relief. She was really afraid that Shui Rulin would insist on asking her to stay. If that happened, she would be unlucky. It was not easy for her to have such a chance to be in the limelight, and she couldn't waste it in vain. Although she was happy, she had to pretend to be reluctant. After hesitating for a while, she said meekly, yes. Qi Rongji also behaved very well today. Before going down with Qin Yuru, she even specially bowed to Shui Rulin, and then followed Qin Yuru out. Both of them were good-looking and behaved appropriately. They were of the same height, and each of them had their own charm, which attracted the attention of a group of madams. They secretly inquired about who they were and whether they had ever been engaged. Qin Wanru followed Shui Rulin to sit in the seat led by the old maid, and she sat beside Shui Rulin. Madame of Duke Xing went to entertain other guests, but she was afraid that the two of them would feel unfamiliar for the first time since they came here, so she deliberately asked the smart old maid who had led the way to stay. Not far away from them, Countess Yong glanced at them coldly with a faint smile, and said something to several madams around her. Immediately, those madams looked at Shui Rulin with a little sarcasm on their faces. A widow remarried. They thought she was a big shot, but unexpectedly Madame of Duke Xing welcomed her at the door. She didn't know whether she had such a good fortune. These madams all boasted that they were born noble, so how could they take a fancy to a remarried widow, especially when Madame of Duke Xing valued her so much just now? When they came in, they were not so grand. His eyes fell on Qin Wanru with a bit of sarcasm. Could she be a burden and come here with me? Two servant girls came over with 2 large fruit basins. They respectfully put down 2 large fruit basins in front of Shui Rulin, and then said, Madame Shui, our madam is afraid that you are not used to the fruits in the capital city. Here are some specialties of Jiangzhou. But it is a little far away, so I am afraid that some are not fresh. Thank your madam for me. Shui Rulin frowned and said softly. Qin Wanru didn't answer. She looked at Madame of Duke Xing through the crowd, with a faint and cold smile on her lips. Madame of Duke Xing had repeatedly expressed her intention in front of so many people. It seemed that Madame of Duke Xing didn't mean it out of kindness. She saw that when Madame of Duke Xing saw the bluegrass pattern on their clothes, although the smile on her face remained unchanged, her eyes narrowed. Did it mean that Madame of Duke Xing knew this pattern? Or did she know about the seal? Today, her embroidery pattern was similar to Qin Yuru's and Qi Rongji's. However, Qin Yuru's pattern was the most similar, followed by her. Qi Rongji's pattern was slightly modified, and her pattern was the least similar. Overall, the 3 embroidery patterns were very similar. However, Qin Yuru's embroidery pattern was authentic, while hers and Qi Rongji's embroidery pattern were fakes. However, since there were fakes, naturally the authentic one was extremely outstanding. She blinked her watery eyes slightly and looked forward to seeing what would happen today. If this seal was really related to Duke Xing's mansion, something would definitely happen at today's banquet. I heard that Madame Shui is a remarried woman? Madame of Duke Xing's repeated displays of goodwill finally annoyed these noble madams, especially those who had been in Duke Yong's mansion and were close to them. At this moment, a madame craned her head out, looked at Shui Ruolin and asked with a faint smile, and the disdain on her lips could not be concealed. Because Shui Ruolin had been prepared in her heart, she nodded naturally and said, "Indeed. Madame Shui is so lucky." The madam covered her mouth with a handkerchief and said sarcastically, "A remarried woman really thought of herself as a big shot. My mother is indeed lucky, but she has a good heart." Qin Wanru had seen all this. Looking at the few madams around her who were talking in twos and threes, she raised her face and said with a smile, "If it weren't for taking care of me, my mother would have wanted to spend the rest of her life in a nunnery lamp." Since these words had been revealed, she should reveal more. Many madams around her did not understand what she said and felt confused. After looking Qin Wanru up and down for a few times, another madam asked curiously, "What do you mean by taking care of you? Doesn't your father have other wives?" They just heard from several madams around Countess Yong that this Qin's mansion was the Qin's mansion where Madame D of Duke Yong's mansion married. "My father naturally has Madame D, but Madame D has to take care of Big Sister, the affairs of the courtyard and some shops, so she can't spare time to take care of me. So my father and Madame discussed it and asked my mother to come into the mansion to take care of me." Qin Wanru smiled slightly and explained. She only took care of her own daughter and didn't take care of another girl? Couldn't spare time? These were all excuses and no one could understand it. Madame D was unwilling to take care of other people's children, so she let such a widow marry into the mansion? But it didn't seem like it. Even if they had not encountered this kind of thing, they must have heard of it. How could she let her husband marry another child in order to take care of a concubine's child? This was a co-wife, not an ordinary concubine or concubine, who couldn't be dealt with at will. Who would find such a big opponent for herself? Looking at Shui Ruolin's extraordinary appearance, everyone felt confused, and someone even secretly looked at Countess Yong's face. There must be something they didn't know. Countess Yong didn't expect that Qin Wanru would say such words on this occasion, and her face turned red with anger, but she also knew that it was not a good time to say more at this time. The matter of Shui Ruolin marrying into the mansion couldn't be exposed. It was said that there were witnesses missing. If they really exposed it, it would definitely be a big deal. Originally, she just wanted to use the momentum of Madame of Duke Xing to secretly provoke a few words, so that those madams, who had always thought themselves superior, couldn't bear to stir up trouble, but she didn't expect that they would stir up trouble again. Tilting her face to the side, she simply pretended not to hear it. "Does it mean that your mother didn't know your father before?" Another madam said in a sarcastic tone. Shui Ruolin's face changed slightly. When she was about to answer, Qin Wanru held her hand and said, "My father naturally knew my mother. Since they knew each other early, how could they take care of each other? Could it be that they took care of each other for marrying into the mansion?" Obviously, the lady was a sharp-tongued one. She sneered and raised her chin high to look at Shui Ruolin. The provocation was obvious. "What do you mean, madam?" Qin Wanru blinked her watery eyes, and her eyes became cold. Although she just looked like a child, her momentum made the low whispers around her quiet. "Nothing. I just asked out of curiosity. Second miss, you are still a child and don't understand. There are many people in this world who take advantage of others. If you are not careful, you will be taken as a reason by others." The madam said disdainfully, which meant that Qin Wanru was cheated by Shui Ruolin. It was clear that Shui Ruolin had colluded with Qin Huaiyong before, but she used taking care of her as a reason. Countess Yong smiled, raised her eyebrows, and continued to pretend that she didn't hear it. Madame of Duke Xing, who was not far away, also smiled very happily and gently talked about some trivial matters with another madam. She didn't know anything about this side. Madam, if you don't believe it, you can go to Jiangzhou to inquire about it. The whole Jiangzhou knows about it. Are the people in the whole Jiangzhou less knowledgeable than Madam? Qin Wanru said unhurriedly and raised her voice a little. Countess Yang's face stiffened, and the smile on her face became much lighter. She couldn't keep it. The madam choked for a moment and blushed for a moment. You are just a child. What do you know? Don't you know that you have been cheated? Madam, you really worry too much. You take care of a child so much. It's really admirable. Shui Rulin gently pinched Qin Wanru's hand and raised her sparkling eyes. She looked at the mean madam with her sparkling eyes. It was obvious that she wanted to bully Qin Wanru in the end, but Shui Rulin said that she took care of Qin Wanru. The mean madam's face became redder and redder. Unexpectedly, the mother and daughter were sharper than the other. What's wrong? What happened? The gentle voice of Madame of Duke Xing came over. Looking at Madame of Duke Xing, who came over a little anxiously, Qin Wanru's eyes became a little watery. If she didn't hear such a big noise, Madame of Duke Xing would pretend too much. Nothing. We just talked about it for fun. A madam came out to smooth things over. Madame Shui, are you really all right? Madame of Duke Xing's eyes fell on Shui Rulin and asked with concern. I'm fine. It's just that some madams have some questions. If there are any madams who are curious about it, you can ask me directly. Wanru is still young and ignorant. If I say something wrong, I hope madams can forgive me. Shui Rulin stood up naturally, bowed slightly to the surrounding people, and then sat down again. It's good that you are fine. It's good that you are fine. Second Miss is such a well-behaved child. How could anyone offend her? Madame of Duke Xing said with a smile. Her face relaxed, and her words became more and more pleasant. She seemed to be kind and harmonious. No matter whether her identity was noble or not, she treated everyone like Qin Wanru. However, Qin Wanru turned her eyes away from Madame of Duke Xing's face indifferently. No matter in the last life or this life, Madame of Duke Xing had always been smooth and slick. Only when she talked to Qin Wanru in private would she reveal her disgust. Was it a cover-up of disgust? Chapter 184. After saying this, Madame of Duke Xing seemed to realize that she had made a mistake. She scolded in a low voice. What do you mean by fighting again? Master Hao has just returned to the mansion. Most of the people who come to the mansion today are womenfolk. Who did he fight with this time? Did you make a mistake? Madam, you didn't make a mistake. It is really Master Hao. The old maid was so anxious that her forehead was covered with sweat. She leaned over and whispered a few words in Madame of Duke Xing's ear. Madame of Duke Xing looked at Qin Wanru with a shocked face. Qin Wanru raised her head and met the surprised eyes of the people of Guild of Duke Xing. She blinked and lowered her head with a confused look. After the initial shock, Madame of Duke Xing had calmed down again at this time. She came over and said to Shui Rulin, Madame Shui, accompany me for a walk. Knowing that she had something to say, Shui Rulin nodded and stood up. Madams, I have something to do. I will accompany you later. Madame of Duke Xing said politely to the madams. Madam, please help yourself. Everyone was also very polite. Madame Shui, please come with me. When turning to Shui Rulin, Madame of Duke Xing looked a little serious. After saying that, she left first, and Shui Rulin followed closely. Seeing that there was something going on, the rest of the madams followed out. A large group of people walked back along the corridor. Coming out from the flower hall, there were pots of chrysanthemums on the road, which were very delicate and beautiful. However, no one was in the mood to appreciate them at this time. They just hurriedly followed the footsteps of Madame of Duke Xing. Madame of Duke Xing also seemed to be anxious and did not notice that many madams were following her all the way. The group of people turned to a moon cave door. Before they arrived, they heard the loud noise over there. Madame of Duke Xing's face changed dramatically, and her footsteps became faster and faster. Not far in front of them, Qin Yuru sat on a stone bench on one side with a very ugly face. She looked very embarrassed. The hem of her elegant long dress had been poured with something, and it was black. At first glance, it was obvious that she could not wear it. Upon a closer look, not only the skirt, but also half of the sleeves were pulled down. Fortunately, most of the people who came today were family members, and there were no men. Otherwise, Qin Yuru's reputation would be damaged. Opposite her, Xiao Yuanhao was also embarrassed. He sat on the ground, crying and throwing a tantrum, and the two servants beside him could not stop him. Qi Rongji stood a few steps away from Qin Yuru and looked a little worried. But when she slightly raised her chin, Qin Wanru could still see a smile on her face. What happened? Madame of Duke Xing came over and said in a deep voice, "Master Hao refuses to get up. He wants this young lady to apologize to him, or he won't get up." An old maid sat on the side with sweat all over her head. "How, oh, what's wrong?" Madame of Duke Xing walked to Xiao Yunhao, who was still crying, squatted down and coaxed him softly. "Madam, she ran Madam, Aunt, and, Matthew Xiao, in I, how, and, Madam, she bumped into me, pushed me, and spilled ink on me. I hate her, and I want her to apologize to me." Xiao Yuanhao said loudly, pointing at Qin Yur. It seemed that he had a good temper, and continued to coax this overbearing child. Madame of Duke Xing seemed to have a very good temper. She continued to coax this little bully. Many madams could not help frowning and felt that after returning to the mansion, they must warn their children not to play with this little bully. This kind of rude and troublesome behavior was really not pleasing to the eye. In the crowd, Qin Wanru's watery eyes moved slightly, and her eyes fell on Madame of Duke Xing's face, which looked too gentle. Even if he was her child, her behavior was too much. Even if Xiao Yuanhao was a little young, the children of aristocratic families usually went to school at an early age. There were many children of his age who were good at studying, but Hao did not seem to have learned anything. Thinking of Xiao Yuanhao's threatening look when they met for the first time, Qin Wanru felt more suspicious. Hearing Madame of Duke Xing's words, Xiao Yuanhao stood up with Madame of Duke Xing's servants, walked to Qin Yuru aggressively, raised his head high, and said loudly, "Apologize to me. I am Master Hao of Duke Xing's mansion." This kind of child was really unlikable. Qin Wanru really could not associate this overbearing and rude child with Hao, who had clung to her at that time. With so many people seeing her like this, Qin Yuru's eyes turned red. Being scolded by a child, she immediately cried. Mei Shui hurriedly reached out to hold her, and her eyes also turned red. She sobbed and said, "First miss, please don't cry. If you cry again, I can't bear it anymore." The master and the servant cried bitterly in each other's arms. In addition, Xiao Yuanhao was arrogant in front of them. If Xiao Yuanhao was not a little young, this scene would be a drama of a bully child robbing a girl, which was so annoying. Many madams looked at Xiao Yuanhao with more disdain. This was a useless playboy. When he grew up, he would just be a playboy in the capital city. Look at him, he did this kind of thing at such a young age, and he seemed to take it for granted. It was really unlikable. "How be good? Look, she is crying. Forgive her." Madame of Duke Xing walked over and touched Xiao Yuanhao's head gently. He touched Xiao Yuanhao's head and smiled. She did not say right or wrong, or even the cause and effect of the matter. But looking at the scene, everyone felt that Xiao Yuanhao was unreasonable, and Qin Yuru and her servant were a pair who had been wronged. "Humph, for the sake of second aunt, I will forgive you this time. Next time I meet you, I will not forgive you." Xiao Yuanhao raised his little face very proudly. "How, go back first. Second aunt will deal with the matter here," Madame of Duke Xing said as she winked at the two servants following her. The two servants came over, took Xiao Yuanhao's hands on each side, and coaxed him to leave. After he left, Madame of Duke Xing walked to Qin Yuru and asked, "Miss Qin, are you hurt? It is all my fault that Miss Qin has been wronged. I will come to apologize to you in the future." Qin Yuru bit her lip, pushed Mei Shui away, and bowed to Madame of Duke Xing with red eyes. She was a junior, and her status was far lower than Madame of Duke Xing. "What is going on?" Shui Rulin also came over and asked. Just a bump. Qin Yuru's tears fell down again, and she lifted the corner of her dress. The big piece of ink should be the ink just now. Just a bump, why is it so serious? Qin Wanru also came over and helped her to lift the corner of her dress, which was full of ink. After looking around, she saw a small bucket overturned on the ground, and there was still some ink in it. What was Xiao Yuanhao going to do with such a big bucket of ink? First, Miss Qin, I asked someone to change clothes for you first. I am really sorry for what happened today, and I hope Madame Shui can forgive me. I am really sorry. Madame of Duke Xing said with embarrassment. Since things had become so serious, Shui Rulin couldn't blame Madame of Duke Xing now, and she also said politely. Madame of Duke Xing arranged someone to take Qin Yuru to change clothes, and Qin Wanru volunteered to go with them. Qi Rongji originally didn't want to go, but seeing that both of them went, she said that she would accompany them. The three of them followed a servant girl of Duke Xing's mansion. The servant girl took them all the way to a yard, walked into a wing room, and asked them to wait for a moment, and then brought a set of clothes. When this set of clothes was brought, not only Qi Rongji's eyes lit up, but also Qin Yuru's eyes lit up. It was very gorgeous, far better than the one Qin Yuru wore today, with pearl hemming and gold thread. The embroidery on it looked exquisite and gorgeous, and the light gauze felt delicate. At first glance, Qin Yuru felt that she liked this set of clothes, and she couldn't help feeling overjoyed. This is our first Mrs. Yard, and first Miss is not here. When we came here just now, Madam asked me to bring a set of first Mrs. clothes for first Miss Qin to change into. The nanny in charge said that first Miss Qin hasn't worn this set of clothes after it was made, and she hoped that first Miss Qin would like it. The servant girl said with a smile. Qi Rongji now wished that she was the one who had an accident at that time. Such a set of clothes, even 4 or 5 sets of hers couldn't compare to this set of clothes. Sister Yuru, when you left the mansion, did you bring clothes? Qi Rongji touched it for a few times reluctantly and said unwillingly. She didn't, and for the best, Qin Yuru didn't. When misses from aristocratic families attended banquets, they usually brought an extra set of clothes, in case of accidents. I didn't bring it today. Qin Yuru lowered her head and said, First Miss Qin, if you don't mind, please put it on. The servant girl said with a smile, as if she didn't understand the meaning of Qi Rongji and Qin Yuru's words. Qin Wanru smiled slightly and walked out of the door without saying anything, and Yu Jia hurried to catch up with her. Seeing that they all went out, Qi Rongji followed them out reluctantly, leaving Qin Yuru alone in the room to change clothes. What on earth happened? Why is Big Sister's clothes dirty, but Miss Qi's clothes are not dirty? After Qin Wanru stood still, she looked at Qi Rongji who followed behind and asked. Qin Wanru, what do you mean? What do you mean by, something happened to her, but nothing happened to me? Qi Rongji was annoyed when she heard this. She was blind and bumped into someone's ink bucket and pushed their child down. You have to blame me for this. The child that Big Sister bumped into? Qin Wanru raised her eyebrows and asked with a look of disbelief, as if Qi Rongji was lying. Her look made Qi Rongji even angrier. Of course it was Qin Yuru who bumped into him. Could it be that I pushed her? She bumped into someone's child and pushed him angrily. It would be strange if the child didn't quarrel with her. Then, why didn't you say it just now? Qin Wanru said in surprise. Who knows? Maybe this child has been making trouble, and the adults don't believe what he said. So, they just don't ask anymore and apologize directly. Qi Rongji curled her lips and said. At this moment, she just wanted to clarify with Qin Wanru, but she didn't notice that the servant girl of Duke Xing's mansion standing beside her had coldly looked at her several times. Chapter 185. After talking for a while, the two of them walked over together. Second Miss Qin, our old madam is very sorry to hear that Master Hao bumped first Miss Qin. She wants to invite first Miss Qin to have a look and see if she is hurt. In fact, it's not only about Master Hao. Big Sister is fine now. Qin Wanru said calmly. Old madam means that she is always worried and it's better to have a look in person. The old maid said with a smile. Qin Wanru frowned calmly. Was it also like this in the last life? Qin Yuru just came to old Madam of Duke Xing's mansion and finally got the favor of old Madam of Duke Xing's mansion. After that, she was raised in Duke Xing's mansion for a period of time. She even postponed her marriage for this favor? Inexplicably, she felt that it was more and more suspicious. Old Madam of Duke Xing's mansion was so kind to an outsider that it was unbelievable. No one wants Big Sister and Master Hao to bump into each other. Moreover, Master Hao didn't mean it. In the end, he was as embarrassed as Big Sister. Old Madam is concerned about this matter and asks Big Sister to have a look. Old Madam is polite, but it will make people think that Master Hao deliberately bumped Big Sister. Qin Wanru said tactfully. She would meet Old Madam, but not now. Hearing her words, the old maid couldn't say anything even if she had more words. If she asked Old Madam to have a look, it would seem that Duke Xing's mansion was really in the wrong. Master Hao did deliberately make trouble. No family was willing to spread the rumor that their child had a bad character. Even a child wanted to have a reputation. Moreover, Master Hao was supported by Ru, and Great Elder Princess. Ru, and Great Elder Princess, was originally dissatisfied with Duke Xing's mansion. If she had something on them, it would not be easy. Then I will go back to Old Madam. Thank you, Qin Wanru said lightly. The old maid had no choice but to turn and leave. The door of the room was pushed open. Qin Yuru appeared in front of everyone in a gorgeous dress. The dress was quite suitable for her, as if it was tailor-made for her. There was a hint of jealousy on Qi Rongji's face. When Qin Yuru wore this set of clothes, she immediately looked more outstanding than her. Since she had changed her clothes, she naturally had to leave here. After a few steps, Qin Wanru seemed to suddenly think of something. She stood still and said to the servant girl who led the way, "Where are the clothes that Big Sister changed?" "Second Miss Qin, those clothes have been dirty. I don't know if they can still be worn." "Second Miss, do you still want them?" the servant girl asked in surprise. "Second Sister, it's so dirty that it can't be washed clean. Please throw the clothes away. We don't want them." Qin Yuru glared at Qin Wanru angrily. She secretly scolded Qin Wanru for being petty. She even wanted to take her dirty clothes back. How could Qin Wanru have the guts to ask? "The clothes have just been splashed with ink, so they can still be worn." Qin Wanru smiled lightly, as if she didn't know that her words sounded extremely shameful. Fortunately, she looked the youngest, and her words were a little childish. The servant girl of Duke Xing's mansion only thought that she came from a small place and was reluctant to part with the clothes. She looked up at Qin Yuru and let Qin Yuru make a decision. "I don't want the clothes." Qin Yuru waved her hand and said, "Then don't we return Big Sister's clothes to Duke Xing's mansion?" Qin Wanru hesitated for a moment and said again. Her words made Qin Yuru's face turn red. She stammered and said, Of course, we have to return the clothes." Although she really didn't want to return the clothes just now, she couldn't say it in front of everyone this time. "Since we have to return the clothes, why don't we ask Duke Xing's mansion to wash the clothes and change them back? Moreover, is it really good to leave Big Sister's clothes in someone else's mansion?" Qin Wanru said with a puzzled look. Qin Yuru was so angry that she wanted to vomit blood. A trace of malice flashed in her eyes, but she had to force a smile on her face. She said to the servant girl beside her, "Then I have to trouble you to wash the clothes for me first. It's best if you can wash them, but it doesn't matter if they can't be washed. After I wash your Mrs. clothes and send them here, please ask the servants of our mansion to bring them back." The servant girl of Duke Xing's mansion answered. They went forward again. Unexpectedly, they saw Xiao Yuanhao at the corridor around the corner. As soon as he saw Qin Yuru, Xiao Yuanhao was furious. He rushed to Qin Yuru and shouted, "Bad person, you are a bad person. You knocked over my ink on purpose. Master Hao, don't make trouble. Don't make trouble again. If you make trouble again, we will lose our lives." The two servants who followed him looked at each other and knew it was not good. They immediately rushed to hold him. Qin Yuru took 2 steps back and looked at him warily. The servant girl of Duke Xing's mansion and Mei Shui stood in front of her, as if they were facing a formidable enemy. Only Qi Rongji curled her lips and took 2 steps back. She decided to watch a good show. How to? Qin Wanru said gently. Xiao Yuanhao, who was struggling, was stunned for a moment. He turned his big eyes and saw Qin Wanru standing aside. He was stunned at first and then became happy. Sister, sister. If it weren't for the servant who was still holding him, he would have run to her. Qin Wanru walked slowly to him and glanced coldly at the two servants who were holding him. The two servants hurriedly let go of him. Xiao Yuanhao rushed to her. After struggling for a while, he was sweating profusely. Why you here how? Qin Wanru said with a smile, and there was a trace of deepness in her black eyes. That day, Ru and Great Elder Princess's intention should be to keep Xiao Yuanhao in Ru and Great Elder Princess's mansion. Why did she see Xiao Yuanhao again and again today and keep making trouble? Grandma asked me to come here. She said that many people would come to the banquet in the mansion today. Sister will also come. I miss you. Xiao Yuanhao, who stood in front of Qin Wanru, was as obedient as a rabbit. He didn't look like he was making threatening gestures just now. He pursed his lips and looked very aggrieved. He pulled Qin Wanru's sleeve and shook it. Sister lied. She said she came to see me, but she didn't. Looking at his aggrieved look, Qin Wanru couldn't help smiling. She reached out and touched his head. So, you came back to Duke Xing's mansion for sister? Of course, sister. Otherwise, I would be with Grandma now. But I couldn't find sister. Xiao Yuanhao became more and more aggrieved. And Great Elder Princess let you go back to the mansion alone? Qin Wanru blinked her watery eyes and asked. Qin Yuru was stunned and her face was a little pale. Nanny Chu came with me, Xiao Yuanhao said. He reached out and pulled Qin Wanru. He got close to Qin Wanru and said mysteriously, Sister, you can write big characters over there. Sister, come with me. Let's play there. It's very fun. You can not only write but also draw. Where is Nanny Chu? Qin Wanru moved her feet slightly and asked softly. I don't know where she is. It seems that Grandma has something to tell Grandma, so she asked Nanny Chu to go there. She hasn't come back until now. Maybe it's something very important. Grandma is afraid that Nanny Chu can't remember it, so she said more. How? Now it's just the two of them. They used to serve me. Xiao Yuanhao looked like a little adult. He reached out and pulled Qin Wanru with a smile. Qin Wanru bit her lips gently. Her long eyelashes fluttered a few times to hide all the questions at the bottom of her eyes. Duke Xing's mansion was too suspicious, and Xiao Yuanhao was too good at making trouble. Because the thing between him and Qin Yuru in front of everyone was not made clear in the end. But everyone must think that it was Xiao Yuanhao's fault. Why did you bump into this sister? Qin Wanru thought of something and pointed at Qin Yuru, who looked a little pale. She is a bad person. She bumped into me on purpose. I was carrying the ink to write. She saw it and bumped into me on purpose. Seeing that Qin Wanru was pointing at Qin Yuru, Xiao Yuanhao immediately became angry. He stared at Qin Yuru and complained. Why did she do it on purpose? Didn't they bump into each other accidentally? Qin Wanru said with a sweet and harmless smile. She did it on purpose. She didn't walk such a big road. Why did she bump into me? She is a bad person and I hate her the most. Xiao Yuanhao seemed to dislike Qin Yuru very much. As long as Qin Yuru was mentioned, he would get angry. His round face puffed up, looking both cute and ridiculous. Second sister, let's go. It's hard to explain to this child. This is Duke Xing's mansion. Don't be a busybody. Qin Yuru coughed in a low voice and said, Bad person, go away. Don't stay in my house. Hearing that Qin Yuru wanted Qin Wanru to leave, Xiao Yuanhao reached out to hold Qin Wanru and angrily drove her away. Big sister, you and Miss Qi can go for a walk. I will play with him for a while. Qin Wanru's eyes flickered and said, Second Miss Qin, let me do it. You are a guest. How can we trouble you to accompany our Master Hao? You and two misses can go outside. I will play with Master Hao here. The servant girl of Duke Xing's mansion answered with a smile. I don't want you. I want my sister. Xiao Yuanhao twisted his little body and did not let go of her. Master Hao, let go of this Mississippi. She is a guest today. Let me take you to see the cricket you liked last time, okay? A servant hurried over and reached out to hold Xiao Yuanhao's hand. But under Qin Wanru's cold gaze, his hand fell down and did not fall on Xiao Yuanhao. Yes, Master Hao. Last time when you were in the mansion, didn't you say you would go to the place where crickets were sold outside? Let me take you there in a while, okay? Another servant also hurried over and squatted beside Xiao Yuanhao to persuade him. Xiao Yuanhao hesitated. He looked at Qin Wanru with a pair of big clear eyes and then looked at the two servants. He felt it difficult to give them up. What should he do if he liked them all? Sister, can you take me to see crickets? After a long while, Xiao Yuanhao asked hesitantly with a face full of desire. Qin Wanru glanced at the servants of Duke Xing's mansion. The strange feeling in her heart became more and more obvious. These servants obviously did not want her to accompany Xiao Yuanhao. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.